What's up, MetaNerdz? In this video we're going to be taking an in-depth look at one of the most convenient ways to conquer a planet, the C-9979 landing craft. We'll go over its original use by the Trade Federation, work our way through its time as the backbone of the CIS invasion fleet, and of course do a complete breakdown, seeing exactly what made it such a reliable piece in the Separatist movement. Let's take a look back before the Clone Wars to get a better idea of the C-9979 and its role in galactic history. Right before the infamous invasion of Naboo that would kickstart the Sith's grand plan, Marauder Engineering, a subsidiary of the Techno-Union, was contacted by the Neimoidians of the Trade Federation to produce a series of vehicles for their schemes. This would be one of those vehicles, and in a short time, the Zychar would see their creations spread like a virus throughout the galaxy in total war. The first time we see these craft in action was the aforementioned blockade, and later invasion of Naboo led by Nute Gunray and his Trade Federation. Painted in the unassuming dull brown of the company, his massive landing vehicles would descend on the landing zone, deploy their droid forces, unloading an army large enough to scare Queen Amidala and her people into signing the treaty. It is during this invasion that we get an interesting look at a tactic used by the Trade Federation, and which would be picked up by the CIS, using a triangular formation of 3 ships during an attack. These craft would land strategically between major cities and deploy their vast array of droids, allowing a swift cutoff of supplies and reinforcements for the defenders. The TF applied this strategy to the whole world, isolating the city of Oxen and securing it before launching a full-fledged assault on the capital of Theed. Each of these would pour out MTTs, AATs, droids, and STAPs, hoping to overwhelm in sheer numbers. At least that was the plan. As we know, through the courage of Padme, the skills of the Jedi, secret amphibious Sith, and with a little luck from Anakin, the invasion of Naboo would be a total disaster for Gunray and his associates. Following this failure to truly conquer Naboo, many of these landing craft would be captured by the Royal Naboo Security Volunteers, as well as the Gungans, and were either scrapped, turned over to the Republic, or taken as a prize, being used as civilian cargo transports. We don't see much from this craft over the next 10 years, as tensions were rising and the Trade Federation would become one of the major members of the CIS, and the only other time we see it before the outbreak of the Clone Wars was during the Battle of Nod Kartha. Legends say it was a skirmish between the Jedi who backed the local resistance against the Trade Federation. The forces of good would come out victorious in that conflict, right before the galaxy was thrown into chaos. Seceding from the Galactic Republic under the leadership of Count Dooku, the newly formed Separatist Alliance would once more call upon the C-9979 to serve as the primary transport for its armor and troops. Painted in the colors of the CIS, blue and gray, and anointed with the symbol of their cause, this vehicle would see use on countless worlds, and even the capital planet of Coruscant would see these monsters landing on its city streets, unloading hundreds of thousands of droids into combat for the capture of Chancellor Sidious. Darth Palpatine. The Senate. A very noteworthy use of this landing craft was actually not the battle between clone and droid, but a scornful encounter between the CIS and the Night Sisters of Dathomir. Here we see these landing craft deliver the Bane of Talzin, as her clan's doom is delivered via the 9979. We see its wreckage across many worlds as well. When the Clone Wars came to a sudden end following the execution of the Separatist Council, the use of the C-9979 appears to have come to an end. The Empire certainly had no use for them, and being as big and laborious as they weren't a good fit for the growing alliance. And so it fell into scrap piles and into galactic history. With the history of this beast in the books, let's take a closer look at the specifications that made this vehicle so useful. As we've previously mentioned, this landing craft was one of the many vehicles produced by the soon-to-be Confederacy by Howard Engineering Corporation. The Zychar that made up this company are a fanatical insectoid-like species whose religion centers around the construction of high-precision machinery. To get a brand new landing craft, you'd have to shell out 12 million credits. That's enough coin to buy you 100 MTTs or 300 Vulture droids. But what did all those credits get you? Well, it's quite a lot in fact. Measuring at a length of 210 meters or 688 feet, it would stretch over 2 football fields, or over 4 A6 Juggernauts placed end to end. With a towering height of 24.6 meters or 80 feet, this thing would be over 2 MTTs tall, about the height of 2 Brachiosaurus, or 98 Buzz droids in their ball form. Powered by ion engines, this ship would reach a max speed of 587 km per hour or 364 miles per hour, and while certainly not slow, landing craft isn't going to win many races, and it would get lapped by other transport ships out there. The Imperial Sentinel shuttle clocks in with a top speed of 1,000 km per hour, and even the Alliance GR-75 gets up to 650. But of course, the C-9979 is the largest. It does come equipped with a Class 2 hyperdrive, the same ones found in the imposing Lucrehulk. And remember, these transports are rarely out on their own, just in case they happen to be separated from the main fleet, and even if it took damage, it did have a backup Class 15 hyperdrive. Incredibly slow, but enough so you could disappear through the blue void. Coming stocked with impressive long-range sensors and shielding, it didn't have to pray to the mechanized bug gods to survive battle, as it even had 4 dorsal-mounted twin laser cannons and 2 wing-mounted twin heavy laser cannons, in case it ever needed to dish out some damage to incoming corvettes or fighters. This armament with the sensors and shielding allowing it to hold its own until reinforcements could back it up. To crew this behemoth, it would take 231 crew, with 88 of those being automated battle droids, while the other 143 being enlisted organic officers and crew. Which is really rare for the CIS, and why so many actual life forms were needed is a mystery that only the Neimoidians or Zychar could answer. But since this is a transport first and foremost, how much cargo could it actually hold? And how many battle droids? Well, it could move 5,500 tons of cargo, depending on the configuration deployed, which is 11 million pounds, the same weight of 846 African elephants, great for toppling the Cosmic Rome, or 3,142 Rancors. Carries a massive 2,500 battle droids and droidekas. When it comes to vehicles, buckle up because it can carry 114 AATs, 1 mobile command center, 11 MTTs, 22 platoon attack craft, and an unspecified amount of NR and N99 Persuader-class droid enforcers, 8 Hydroid Medusas, and 144 Vulture droid starfighters, depending on how you wanted to configure it. So as you can see, this transport certainly packs a punch, and if you have 10 or 20 of these things deployed from the control ships blockading your world, the sheer amount of arms and armor would seem uncontestable. So once this thing landed, how exactly was this army deployed? Let's break down this process from takeoff to touchdown. Usually deployed from the hangars of Lucrehulks, it would clear the atmosphere before beginning its landing cycle in the designated landing zone. In the final moments before landing on the planet's surface, massive repulsor lifts would activate to keep the ship steady, making use of super magnum anti-gravity coils, making sure the ship would stay true to course and stable when its landing gear deployed and hit the ground. All of these precautions when landing this massive craft may seem like overkill, but when this many assets are at stake, one can never be too cautious. Imagine the financial loss this would be for the Neimoidians. And it shows that the technology in the Star Wars galaxy, while certainly fantastical, is not magic and does in fact attempt to make some sense. With all these overlapping systems, it makes me wonder if repulsor lifts are subject to a real-world phenomenon called the vortex ring state, an aerodynamic condition in which a vortex ring forms around the rotor, causing a severe and often irreversible loss in lift capability. Maybe the Howard encountered similar issues in previous designs and implemented more measures to ensure a steady and safe landing. But following that landing, perimeter field sensors would scan the surrounding area for landmines or other hazards that could cause issues in the deployment process. And once in the clear, the gargantuan doors would swing open and the drop ramp would be let down. Out first would be the pre-staged combat-ready units. This would consist of either MTTs, like we see on Naboo, or AATs, as we often see during the Clone Wars. Repulsor tracks that lined the staging area, as they were too big and unwieldy to navigate inside of these wings without assistance. These tracks would lead the armor from the inner wings, where they were stored for transport, to the staging area above the main gate. The transport clamps would assist the vehicles in being lowered to the ramp for deployment onto the battlefront. This process was not quick, and depending on how many vehicles needed to be deployed, the entire process could take upwards of 45 minutes. The ship also serves as a sort of command center for the Federation or Separatist forces. When an AAT used all of its ammunition, it wasn't reloaded by B-1s like their artillery is on Ryloth, but instead these tanks would return to the C-9979 and have their entire lower frame removed within the safety of the landing craft, having this bottom shovel foot part replaced with one full of more ordnance, before being sent back off into combat. While interesting, with the speed of the AAT, I'm not sure this is the most practical tactic, but this ability is extremely useful when paired with the deployment of a mobile command center, like the one we see on Felucia during Ahsoka's kidnapping. An MCC would be set up with a landing craft at its center. Tall walls, droid sentries, and a large gate made this a quick and protected way to install a base of operations for Separatist forces. Although not seen on Felucia, if you paired this center with AAT and MTT reinforcements, it would truly be a deadly way to not only launch an invasion, but keep your landing zone safe. One issue of this mobile command center, an issue fully taken advantage of by the clones on Felucia, was the lack of shielding around that base, making it extremely vulnerable to not only bombing runs and airstrikes, but from artillery as seen with the mass driver of the ATT. Having a mobile shield generator would make it almost impenetrable, but that shield would have to be deactivated to allow the landing craft to pass, as well as any repulsor tanks used by the Seps, while Republic walkers would just be able to storm right in. When not in use, the C9979 would be broken down, with its massive wings stored separately from the body to prevent unnecessary strain to the vehicle. When in operation, the wings were attached to this main body via specialized tensor fields to prevent them from sagging under their own weight, or even breaking off mid-flight. And this ship does have one known variant, the nicely named C9969 landing craft, which was mentioned in the new Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels. It's essentially the same ship, but is said to be slightly larger, just allowing for even more armored vehicles to be carried into battle. So that's it for the breakdown, but check out these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. First entered the galaxy via the Phantom Menace novelization, and of course was soon seen in the film. Being the main mode of transport for the CIS, it's made its way into comics, games, books, and TV shows. Both Clone Wars and The Clone Wars feature this ship, with the version in the latter being surprisingly undersized. It's caused some confusion in legend and canon sourcebooks. Encyclopedia of Star Wars and Other Vehicles has different size measurements from this official databank. The same encyclopedia gives differing figures on the droid capacity of the ship, which conflicts with the more recent Rise of the Separatist book. And so even with the new canon trying to clear up some of the confusion and conflicting information covering all this stuff for decades, even newer canon material has different figures. Though the only variation is that one mentioned, which is just larger than what we see in Phantom Menace, not the smaller one we see in the Clone Wars show. The final design of this craft was drawn up by the famed Star Wars concept artist Doug Chiang, who based its look on a dragonfly, and what Lucas liked about it is that he said it reminded him of an old biplane. But that's it for the C9979. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, subscribe to see more, and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, next time you're invading a peaceful planet, please allow for 45 minutes to deplane, and the Force will be with you, always.
Going down!
When you need secure transport without all the bells and whistles of the LAAT, look no further than the trusty new class shuttle. What's up, MetaNerdz? Today we'll be learning all about the Grand Army of the Republic's new class shuttle. Everything from stats, history, role, and more, using all canon and legend sources, getting into its history post-Republic, and finish out with some cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. The legendary LARTI, or LAATI, stole the show as the Republic's trustworthy and effective gunship throughout the Clone Wars. While its firepower and maneuverability were praised, its durability left something to be desired.
Brace yourself!
The LARTIs and their valuable cargoes of clone troopers took substantial losses in the early months of the war, leading to the desire for a replacement. Cygnus Spaceworks fulfilled this requirement through the development of the new class attack shuttle. The new class was designed with its role as a troop transport first and as a gunship second. It featured an effective dual-wing design and stooped cockpit module around a compact trooper bay, capable of carrying 30 fully loaded troops. While lacking the speeder bikes that the LAATI could bring along, the troops aboard enjoyed a much greater degree of safety, a paramount concern for Cygnus, which is expressed through a number of design features. Firstly, the shuttle featured a dorsal shield-generating fin, which enveloped the ship in a protective bubble like a starfighter. The LAAT had no shielding. It had these blast doors which could stop some small arms fire, and an atmospheric shielding which just made sure that the oxygen stayed in when it was traveling through space. But it was an unshielded gunship, so just adding that feature puts the new in a completely different category. The tri-wing designs of the later Cygnus craft allowed for effective shield dispersion around all parts of the ship, which lent them to greater protection, a feature possibly originating with the new with its dual wings and dorsal fin. The troop compartment itself was lined on each side with inbuilt seats, each with a crash harness that folded over the chest in the event of a hard landing. The ability for passengers to be seated and safely restrained during landings greatly improved their survivability in battlefronts all across the galaxy, in comparison with the LAAT's standing trooper bay. LAATs which took direct hits typically had all of their passengers killed when they crash landed, thrown about the compartment at lethal speeds with nothing to brace themselves with. The brutal Second Battle of Geonosis provided many bloody examples of this, with only General Kenobi and one other trooper surviving this hard crash landing, and even then they were seriously injured. Council member Coyote-Mundi was badly wounded in an LAAT crash as well, and 4 Jedi were killed aboard their gunships during the landing phase of the Battle of Murkana. In comparison, crash landings in the new were much more survivable. During a diplomatic mission to Florum, an intercepted Nu was hit and crash landed, breaking in two upon impact. Despite this catastrophic damage, 5 of the 6 passengers survived and were without injury.
Pilots are dead!
A new transporting Cody and Crosshair took multiple hits from RPS-6 rocket launchers during their mission to Desix, and survived to crash land despite those same launchers being capable of downing HMP gunships with a single shot, powerful enough to get through the droid gunship shielding and through the armor. When you add all these instances up, you see that the passengers in the trooper compartment enjoyed an above 50% survival rate, even when they weren't securely seated at the time of the crash. It's clear that Cygnus had delivered on their promise of making a much more survivable platform to GAR service, well suited to the assaults in heavily defended drop zones. And the cherry on top of the durability and shielding was the speed, 850 kilometers per hour, reducing the time the Nu spent under enemy guns from high atmosphere down to the ground. And it's not that far off from some fighters, and is even tied with the TIE bomber. Its final survivability feature was the escape pod, which likely consisted of the head of the transport jettisoning itself from the body, being its own self-sufficient little craft that could navigate even deep space. Again, this feature would be seen in later Cygnus shuttle products. The troops disembarked through the forward hatch mounted under the cockpit, covered by a pair of medium dual laser cannons mounted on the cheeks of the shuttle's control section in swivel turrets. 2 sets of dual light laser cannons, one on each side of the fuselage next to the wing joints, gave the shuttle a chance to drive off enemy fighters. The pilots were seated in a paired double canopy section, reminiscent of the LAATI's design, lined with controls needed to operate the craft, and which provided decent visibility. Unlike the LAAT, the Nu was well suited to operations in space as well as in atmosphere, and came equipped with an excellent Class 1 hyperdrive. That's faster than most starfighters out there in the galaxy. That hyperdrive, as well as the 2 full days of stores, gave the Nu significant range, allowing the shuttle greater use as an inspection and patrol vessel, carrying teams of specialists or officers to distant outposts. While newer stats up that range greatly, increasing it to an entire month, with a backup Class 12 hyperdrive, which is very slow but really just something you hope to never use. The Nu was designed with carrier operations in mind, its wings folding up to a vertical position to allow greater deck space in a similar fashion to the V-19s and later Cygnus shuttles. And while it was initially envisioned to entirely replace the Lardy, this never did come to pass, and instead the shuttle settled into its own specialized niche. While the Nu could ferry troops planet-side quickly, its capabilities as a gunship were limited, without the hard points or heavy missile launchers of its competitor. The inclusion of that hyperdrive made the Nu expensive in comparison to the relatively cheap LAAT, which the Republic was able to pack into the hangar decks of Acclamators and Venators by the thousands. Such a widespread replacement would not be economical, and instead the Nu's found roles as interfleet transports, ferrying personnel, messages, and valuable cargo, and were particularly popular among officers, who benefited from the secure transport for them and their staff. The Nu also spawned a sub-variant, the Rho-class transport shuttle, which we might cover at a later time. The Nu is said to cost 85,000 credits brand new, supposedly the same as the LAAT, but that doesn't really match up with the lore on all these improvements on shielding and that ridiculous Class 1 hyperdrive, with both of those features being the most expensive things to add to a ship. But since that also meant the maintenance cost would be high, perhaps that's why you can find them used for so cheap. Because when the Republic became the Empire, you could pick up a used Nu for 50,000 credits. That's less than the cost of a new TIE fighter. Nus were inherited into the Galactic Empire's military along with the rest of the Republic war materiel, and are rare in that they served for a considerable time before being phased out. The Empire got rid of the Lardys first, but retained the more modern and survivable Nus as it spread its reach across the galaxy, finally replacing the LAATs in a way the Republic never did. Under the Empire, they weren't doing planetary assaults as in the Clone Wars, and the Nu became more of a protective shuttle, not really in an attack shuttle role, seen used by enlisted personnel and officers alike, with even notables such as Grand Moff Tarkin and Admiral Rampart favoring the dependable Nu for its speed and protection. And these would be eventually phased out by the new Lambda shuttles rolling off Cygnus production lines, which specialized in the transport and VIP role, dropping the attack transport capability of its predecessor. If it landed here on Earth, it would be about as long as 3.5 giraffes laid end to end, or about 1.5 school buses long. In flight mode with its wings extended, the Nu would be about as tall as an Olympic swimming pool is wide, or 6 SUVs laid end to end. Sadly, we have no stat on how heavy it is, although with a cargo capacity of 2 tons, you can get more than 2 full dewbacks in there, and with the volume, you're looking at about 140 Yoda species, if you ever caught them all. And as for cool facts and behind the scenes stuff, you can get your hand on the new class and use it to drop off troops yourself via mods for Empire at War such as Fall of the Republic and Republic at War. While a lot of this info comes from the Clone Wars visual guide, the campaign guide, Encyclopedia of Starfighters and Other Vehicles, and Rise of the Separatist guidebook. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, share the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to see more. That's all the best ways to help me out. But most important of all, remember, it doesn't matter how great your ground troops are if they get blown up in the sky. And the Force will be with you. Always. When you want the transport capability of an MTT, but you don't need to have enough armor to knock down a building, look no further than the Platoon attack craft. What's up, MetaNerds? Today we're going to be taking a look at the Trade Federation's Platoon attack craft, otherwise known as the PAC. We'll be using both legends and canon sources to deliver you a complete picture of the PAC's stats, capabilities, and role in the Trade Federation's forces, from the Battle of Naboo to beyond. The Platoon attack craft played an essential role in Trade Federation and later CIS forces, transporting massive quantities of battle droids as a part of a larger combined arms operation. The vehicle, 26 meters in length, was essentially a repulsor lift sled adapted from civilian use, similar to how the Trade Federation adapted the STAP from a civilian airhook. Here we can see the continued trend of the Trade Federation in this early period when they tried to present themselves as a purely commercial enterprise, concealing their considerable warfighting abilities in the development of their combat vehicles. The sled was piloted by a pair of OOM pilot droids, likely replaced during the Clone Wars with independently thinking models. The PAC carried a rack stowing 112 battle droids armed with standard blaster rifles, identical to the rack carried on board its larger brother, the multi-troop transport. The PAC, with its open design, is unarmored and did not have any weaponry, making the troops it carried very vulnerable even to small arms. Thus, the PAC's primary role was shuttling droids around in occupied areas or far behind the battle lines, ideally away from enemy fire. During the occupation of Naboo, they can commonly be seen fulfilling this purpose. Later, we would see them break this rule, with the PACs being used in the direct assault on Republic positions in the amphibious assault on Kachiro Beach, possibly only because the heavy MTTs could not hover across the lake. When the Trade Federation became a part of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, they took their arsenal with them, including their stockpile of PACs. Platoon attack craft were used to shuttle droids from the factories and holding areas to the Petronaki Arena on Geonosis, during what would become the first battle of the Clone Wars, and they were later seen on Hisrich in the aforementioned Kashyyyk. Unlike most donated vehicles, they were not repainted in CIS colors, instead appearing in their standard Trade Federation livery. So without armor and weapons, why would the Trade Federation CIS use the PAC over the much more capable MTT Big Brother? Well, firstly, and never to be underestimated in importance to Neimoidians, is cost.
This is outrageous! I object!
The PAC cost a mere 37,000 credits versus the MTT's 120,000, so it's more than 3 times cheaper. Additionally, the use of less materials freed up additional supplies and factory space, meaning you could pump out these and other craft faster. Secondly, the PAC was a faster vehicle, nearly twice the speed, moving without any of the heavy armor of the MTT at a rate of 50 km per hour at maximum thrust. In a transport role, the PAC was superior to the MTT, moving troops to their destination faster and with equal transport capacity, as long as they did not encounter enemy resistance. The Trade Federation clearly saw them as integral to their combat operations, with their C9979 transports carrying 28 of these vehicles, compared to just 11 MTTs, and with Lucrehulks transporting 1,500 PACs compared to 550 MTTs, almost triple the amount. So with all those advantages, why are they so rarely seen in the Clone Wars? The most important reason of all is their vulnerability. They can't be used in the battle lines like the MTT, like we see on Dathomir during Grievous's invasion. Even on nominally secured planets, their cargo of droids is extremely vulnerable to even attacks from blasters and grenades. Thus, on worlds with significant partisan activity, such as Ryloth and Onderon, it was safer to move droids and cargo within protected MTTs, with thick armor that was virtually impossible for lightly armed rebels to breach. Unless of course they got help from the CIA, Jedi.
I love this!
However, it can be assumed that on secure separatist worlds, it would have been a common sight to see PACs shuttling around cargo and droids, going in between factories and garrisons. That's just the side of the Clone Wars we don't see too often. And then because the droid army was decommissioned after the Clone Wars, these all would have been rapidly decommissioned vehicles, and it was simple to reconvert them, just take the rack off, and now they're standard civilian cargo sleds. and this would have been a really useful vehicle for any world, being the same length as 2.5 school buses, and although no stats exist on the width or height, we can estimate it to be around 2 meters tall, without the rack, using this B1 pilot droid as a reference. This would make it as tall as a king-size bed and almost as wide as a Wookiee plus a Jawa. Although it looks the same, it is unknown whether the droids would deploy from the racks as with the MTT, with those racks spreading laterally in a sequential fashion, or if they deployed by some other method. And keep in mind that the MTT could swap out its rack to carry 20 B2 super battle droids or 20 droidekas. It's unknown if the PAC had this capability, but I don't see why not, which is terrifying to think about, a rapid response hover sled full of 20 droidekas. Sadly, there's not too much cool facts or behind the scenes material to discuss with this vehicle. Its first identification was oddly not in a vehicle, but rather a locations sourcebook, with its name emerging in the early drafts of the Phantom Menace. A LEGO set created for the PAC in 2015 carried a paltry 8 droids in comparison to what should be 112, a minifig collector's dream. Maybe an update to this forgotten vehicle will come out soon. If not, we'll all express to Dave Filoni our utmost disappointment. If you made it this far, please hit that like button. Comments, shares, it's all the best way to help me out. Subscribe to bring balance to the algorithm. But most important of all, remember, if your tactical droid commander assigns you to one of these, make sure you get this bottom bunk. It might give you some semblance of protection. And the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerds? Let's break down the All-Terrain Open Transport, or ATOT. And we'll start with its main role. It might seem odd to have an open top in a war where an enemy was pumping out swarms of cheap and effective droid fighters like the Vulture and Hyena. They could just strafe these tightly packed in clones, or drop a single bomb on them. But just looking at the context we first see them in does help us understand it more. They have the most heavily armed and armored unit at the very front, the ATTE. In that vehicle's breakdown, we saw how effective the main cannon could be at long range, and the suite of terrain sensors to assess the threats on the battlefront. It was accurate enough to shoot down nimble starfighters, and even incoming rockets. And at the rear of this column we see a pair of AT-APs. The all-terrain attack pod had lighter armor, didn't serve that dual role as a troop transport like the TE, but was a great mix of that tank and artillery like the AV-7. Having this enormous heavy blaster cannon, that makes the mass driver look small in comparison, even though it's the exact same one used on the AT-TE. Since that mass driver cannon had a variable munitions launcher, it could fire everything from bunker busters to armor-piercing rounds, generate bolts to take down battle droids, or shoot down starfighters. And although not explicitly stated, I don't see why it couldn't also fire flak and work like an anti-aircraft gun, like we saw with the Geonosians during the Second Battle of Geonosis. And if you look in between the walkers, there are two pairs of ISPs. The infantry support platform was a rapid response hovercraft, with two twin blaster cannons that would race out to the sides to flank any enemies they encountered, or break through the ambush and circle back to pincer these attackers. So it wasn't like the open transports were leading the charge against fortress walls, waiting for hot droid oil to be poured on them. And they even had the boys on Slugback keeping a lookout as well. One design improvement over the Tactical Enforcer is that it no longer has a weak, flexible midsection. It does have this smaller, more AT-AT-like weak neck connection, but even then, because of the way this armored section extends over it, you still get full range of motion without the threat from being shot down from above. With aircraft being your greatest threat, this would force the enemy to take a lower angle of attack, trying to shoot at it from the sides. And when possible, a smart walker pilot could make that angle of attack impossible by using terrain like buildings, canyons, or vegetation to make sure the starfighter couldn't get a low side angle. There were 3 major battles of Felucia, with this sector being one of the hottest conflict zones of the war. Neither Republic nor Separatist general felt that they ever had complete control of this jungle world, with the fate of a battle being changed by the arrival of a C-9979 or Acclamator descending through the hot and humid atmosphere. And so these walkers would be crucial in making sure that any area that was captured by the Republic would be securely supplied and defended from there on out. The ATOT itself stood 5.8 meters tall and had a length of 14.3 meters, making it a child Jawa shorter than the ATTE and about an Ewok longer, while actually being a bit slower at 55 kilometers per hour or 34 miles per hour, and likely had a similar 500-mile range on its fuel tank. Most of the walker line used the same parts, so everything from the sensors inside to the legs themselves are the same. And though slightly different, the same goes for the cockpit canopy design and function. The forward weaponry is a pair of medium laser cannons, while the rear 2 are anti-personnel cannons, in the same style as the ATTE. And we can imagine the inside look pretty similar as well, with a gunner operating each of these guns in a large open troop section, but not split into 2 sections. Kuat Drive Yards state that there are 34 seats for troops up top, and I'd guess likely around 20 to 30 troops inside. Though officially there is no internal troop capacity ever mentioned, and so it may have just been dedicated to supplies, heavy weaponry like turrets, and small vehicles like speeder bikes and frog walkers. If there are no troops inside, this could point to another theory I have on why we see this open-top design pop up towards the end of the war. If we're keeping it real with Kuat, their armor wasn't cutting it. All the walkers were impervious to things like blaster fire and grenades, and while it's true that an AT-OT trooper would be worried if they did walk into an ambush, all that small arms fire would be focused on them. But if a separatist bomb or missile hit you, you were dead either way, no matter which armored walker you were in. You can have a nice Durasteel coffin in your AT-TE, or be scattered out the top like clone confetti, but the survival rate was the same. Toward the end of the war, debates were raging in the Senate over how they were going to keep paying for everything, getting so bad that it threatened to foil Palpatine's plans and bring peace.
The Republic is near bankruptcy due to the cost of this war.
Won't this bill essentially deregulate the banks? A small price to pay to finance the war, is it not?
So the AT-OT was a cheaper option and could move about 3 times the troops of the AT-TE. Since they would be used alongside other assets, this was a cheap force multiplier that effectively wasn't any weaker against things like Hailfire droids and hyenas, because dead is dead, they weren't more dead. And in fact, it might have been even safer since they could bail out of the top. Even standing at its highest, it would only be about a 2-story jump. Not the most comfortable, but these clones were elite, and they wouldn't have thought twice about it. And that's jumping off from here. But towards the rear, you see the ramp that cut this height in half, to around 10 feet, which was designed to be used when it sat down to deploy them like we see with the AT-TE. And the fact that this is down while they are moving, not expecting to take contact, before they even saw the enemy, shows how the clones and Republic command adapted to the war. It didn't hurt to just leave it down, so just have it down all the time, and I could see the training around this being that at the first sign of enemy armor or aircraft, the troops could bail over the top or slide down this ramp, hit the ground running, and spread out to secure the perimeter, and make sure no enemy infantry closed in on the armored units. The height of the walls in this section is perfect to completely protect them from the sides when seated, and even when standing, only their armored heads, about from the eyes up, would be exposed, allowing them to keep a lookout as they walk through the terrain, be that a dense jungle or occupied city. Another interesting use is that since the legs are the same as the AT-TE, it could scale almost any terrain, even 90-degree sheer cliff walls, due to the footpads having both magnetic clamps, but more importantly tractor beam tech that's usually only seen in ships, which warped gravity to create this pull, locking the foot onto whatever it was climbing over, allowing the AT-OT to shuttle supplies and troops to remote outposts or zones that were first established by LAATs, letting the gunships clear everything out, drop some forward command stations and maybe a tank or two, and have the OTs come through to secure these positions. The mission we see them on in the final moments of the war resulted from the Outer Rim sieges, the CIS effort to overwhelm areas in the Outer Rim to draw the Republic out of the core, setting up the attack on Coruscant. The 327th Star Corps Infantry, under the command of Jedi General Aayla Secura, would try to capture Shu Mai, the president of the Commerce Guild. But to divert the Republic forces, the Separatist leaders set off a series of explosions that essentially held the planet hostage. Toxins were leaking into the planet-wide aquifer on Felucia, and if the Republic didn't act quickly, this would poison all life on this lush world within just 4 days. The armored column was led by General Secura, and she had just discovered enemy armor near the water treatment facility. Just as Order 66 was being broadcast, a Felucia bird, possibly a variant of a Pico Pico, gets startled and screeches past Aayla, distracting her for just a moment as her clones open fire. Partly due to her leadership style, but also just because they'd seen how unstoppable Jedi could be, they make extra sure that she is dead. In the Imperial era, like most of the CIS and Republic ships and vehicles, the AT-OTs would be scrapped on planet-wide facilities like Bracca. While some AT-TEs and Juggernauts live on a bit longer, they ultimately met the same fate, with stormtroopers and cargo being moved around with things like the Imperial Troop Transport and AT-AT. There was no longer the need for as many walkers, since their main advantage was that they could walk through energy shields, just like we see with infantry, and not be repulsed away like the hovercraft using repulsor tech to get off the ground. Since the AT-OT wasn't meant to lead from the front, though using a repulsor craft would have been quicker to shuttle things about, it also meant that you couldn't walk through your own shields. Clones would put up portable base shield generators and be confident that enemy AATs or C9979s could not get through, since they both rely heavily on repulsor tech. But in order for this strategy to work, your resupply vehicles also had to be walkers, even if that meant they were a bit slower. But when this wasn't a concern, you did have the RTT, the Republic Troop Transport, which was like a powerful speeder, a land-based LAAT, and would be the inspiration for the ITT, since the enemy was now your own citizens, not a massive, fully funded military with repulsor tanks and their own energy shields. But on the rare occasion when the enemy did get their hands on a shield, the Empire could send in their AT-AT, DP, and ST. So that's it for the breakdown. I hope it explains why the AT-OT definitely had a role in the Republic Army. And as for behind the scenes facts, like most of the Star Wars ships and vehicles, it was intended to evoke things from World War I and II, which is why you have stuff like charging tactics, exposed gunners, manually firing cannons, and other tech that seems out of place on a sci-fi battlefront. And so this was meant to be reminiscent of open-top troop carriers, everything from trucks to half-tracks. Now they only appear in Revenge of the Sith, and it is a bit of a forgotten vehicle, only appearing in the 2014 mobile game Galactic Defense. Not even in Empire at War or the Battlefront games. And there is no cross-section for it, but the other ones used come from the Complete Cross-Sections book, and there are some details in the Complete Visual Dictionary. If you like this video, please hit that like button. It really is the best way to help me out. Leave a comment on this or suggestions for future videos, share it, and check out the membership. But most important of all, remember, when you hear a hyena, tuck and roll, because broken ankles bog down campaigns, and the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerdz? For this complete breakdown, we'll be comparing the Marauder to Clone Wars and Imperial vessels, taking a tour of its interior and looking at its strengths and weaknesses. Let's start with its manufacturer, Cygnus Spaceworks, who made most of the military shuttles of this era, from the Nu, Theta, Sentinel, Eta, Alpha, and later Lambda. And the company even played a part in the stealth craft turned flagship for Tarkin, the Carrion Spike. The design includes cues from the Nu-class body, with a wing style closer to the Theta and Eta. And although there are no official stats for the Omicron, we can deduce a lot by looking at these ship siblings. In this battle, it appears to be about 1.5 times the Nu, so around 30 meters long, and a height from the lower wing to the tip being around 37.5 meters, which would make it second only to the Sentinel-class in size, and you could stack a couple ATTEs up next to it when it was docked. One of the first modifications of this shuttle is the speed. Stock, I would put it around 1,000 kilometers per hour, since most of these are around 850. Meaning it would match the Sentinel, while there are things like the Theta used by Palpatine that hit 2,000 kilometers per hour. So as ridiculous as it sounds, the Marauder might be quicker than a TIE fighter, and we get a glimpse of this when it separates from the Invulnerable. Just look at how agile it is at flipping over and racing away. So I think around 1,500 kilometers per hour in this heavily modified version. And speaking of TIEs, this is the only shuttle like it that works in heat radiating panels into these massive wings like the TIE line of fighters. They probably went so large with these wings because of that souped up ion engine, because when you throw that in with the weapons and shields, in a shuttle of this size, the power generator in this thing must have had it running extremely hot. The ship is classified as an assault shuttle, and packs 2 front laser cannons and a powerful aft laser turret, which is perfect for their usual mission objectives, which hoped for a more stealth approach while being capable of blasting their way out. Like the ARC-170 and Ghost, having a dedicated gunner that can clear away tailing enemy craft is such a useful force multiplier, that even though it's just a normal strength cannon, this placement and ability to hop in and take control makes it so much harder to pursue or shoot it down. The Omicron-class was rare, but not so obscure that nobody ever heard of it.
Looks like a modified Omicron-class attack shuttle.
This clone does work the impound, so he probably has a higher knowledge of ships than most, but that means it isn't some one-off custom ship designed for this top-secret military unit. Clone Force 99 is such a secret that even Rex, one of the most prominent clones and the second in command to General Skywalker, who was himself the most beloved general of the war, even Rex doesn't know much about them.
So why haven't I heard of this squad? Experimental Unit Clone Force 99. The defective clones with, desirable mutations. 99, eh? Huh, nice touch.
This nice touch was the homage to their fallen brother 99, who died in the heroic defense of their homeworld, Kamino. A man seen by his own creators as a useless failure and perversion of their genetic program, but was seen as a beloved brother by all clones who heard the story of 99.
I know you work with Cody sometimes, but who do you guys report to? Good question. Can't say I've got an answer.
So while we're surprised that Rex is out of the loop on anything, this is a nice look at the structure of the Grand Army of the Republic, as Cody is higher ranking, a CC or clone commander, with a specialized genome and training program from birth for his role as commander, while Rex is just a CT, or clone trooper. And it's just a testament to his incredible willpower and uniqueness that allowed him to fit right in and be respected and often deferred to by force-wielding Jedi generals and enhanced CCs. When the ship lands, we see that signature Cygnus wing folding, and the landing gear that extends is standard, with running fog lights that we can see are always on but can be increased to act like headlights, like that main one towards the front. These experimental clones have no respect for the Reg's flight control or landing protocols, screaming into forward and axis and scattering crates everywhere. And later you get a good look at the footprint of this massive craft on an Axis base. We see that it can be piloted by one person, and that these control panels were used for navigation to slice up space into grids, and were mirrored for the co-pilot. While the rest of the panels can display everything from local space orbits to holoweb surfing, with its powerful long-range hyperwave transceiver that could reach out across the entire galaxy with this faster-than-light means of communication. The gonk on board was from his own bad batch of droids.
I'm fixing it.
You can't. He's a defective unit.
Hunter.
Don't worry, we're defective too.
Gonky here provides additional power, and by having it not always plugged into the ship, you could hit the Marauder with an ion attack that disables everything, but then still run things off of this portable generator, or plug it into the ship after this attack to get some systems back online. We see it used to power up shields and get engine systems back up after being peppered by V-wings. But since it was now plugged into the ship, when the Marauder gets hit some more, those balls of plasma are dispersed across the shield, and that electricity does start to transfer to the ship itself, and everything connected to it. Shocking gonky, just like we see with other droids like Chopper. But when not in the heat of battle, it can be used as a table for board games, a second hand to hold your tools, and most important of all, it turns the ship into a gym, being a full-body workout device. The main body of this ship has these crash harnesses, and shelves and storage spaces that Wrecker would use like a bed, with more storage and perhaps the beds for the rest of the Bad Batch up top, which all sounded like a dream to a young Harrison Dula.
You get to live on a starship? That's my dream.
When the boys decided that Omega would become the newest member of the Bad Batch, they turned the turret into her room, with the latter making it feel like a big bunk bed or even treehouse vibes, which shows these guys were new parents, because she had her own separate escape door, with this hatch that opens up below the turret, something that did prove useful in escaping from the Zygerians. The interior is filled with all sorts of artwork, from Republic military victory propaganda posters to pinups, and a bunch of ads for blasters straight out of the Blaster and Tabana magazine, and even a relatable I Want to Believe poster. Like all starships, the fine controls for space travel can be used to hover in place, which when combined with these winches, they can drop down into deep caverns, as the cables seem to go on for at least several hundred feet. And you could imagine this being used to lift up or move around cargo, and even lighter vehicles like speeder bikes. It also provides a stealthy way to deploy or rapidly evac if they use something like the Skyhook technology. We see the Marauder going to all sorts of hostile locations, from dangerous environments to deadly locals. Side note, comment what you think of this.
My intel says the Poltecs worship flying reptiles.
These Poltec dragons look a lot like the form the Brother takes, and I think it might point to an idea that's explored in some of the expanded universe, that some populations' religious ideas evolved from the sighting of these powerful force-wielding family members, the father, brother, and sister. As the Darksider was going to and fro across the galaxy, their Poltec ancestors saw this dragon creature do something incredible, and that memory was forever enshrined in their religion. Comment down below what you think of that. But back to the ship, Tech has an excellent idea of hitting the chain code problem head on, when he learns that the Empire is using a blockchain sort of technology to track all people and objects across the galaxy. Instead of trying to evade this, he gets in early by registering it with fake details. But those details are now enshrined in the blockchain from then on out, and would appear legitimate. A great idea, even if this method of letting the imps impound them was a bit too risky for Hunter, and their escape did result in the barrage of fire that resulted in a lucky bolt hitting a capacitor.
One of our capacitors sustained damage during our firefight with the Wraiths.
When they work on repairing it, they have to contend with Ordo moon dragons, which lived off of raw energy, and would consume power systems and ships like the Pilot's Bane, the Minox, that were hated throughout the stars for their similar appetite. Many crucial systems are right behind these panels, making everything easier to reach and repair.
The signature key should be embedded below the rear parallax inverters.
Just tell me what to rip out.
And since Tech was the one who knew the ship inside and out, he felt like he was closer to her than any others.
Wrecker, easy with my ship.
Your ship?
And his expertise is able to scramble their signature. They know that credits can make sure you aren't even scanned as long as you avoid major Imperial ports or automated scanners at more heavily trafficked locations. But by making use of criminal elements, you also expose yourself to bounty hunters. And when trying to run from the Empire and the likes of Cad Bane, their luck was sure to run out eventually. Over all these different missions, we see how scratched up and tarnished the exterior of the ship is getting, with this patina forming on some material, a corrosion of a copper alloy that is making it have these patches of blue-green. There are 14 different types of popular copper alloys in the galaxy far, far away, used in everything from ship armor to jewelry and statues. So it'd be interesting if this is pointing to a rarer alloy used for some superior stealth or heat dispersing capacity. That's it for its breakdown. Can't wait to see more of it in action in Season 2, but as for behind the scenes facts, we've actually seen this ship since 2014, when the unfinished Clone Wars episodes were revealed, and this part was cut, perhaps deemed too racy, as it's one of the most obvious changes from what we eventually got in Clone Wars Season 7.
Yeah, she can negotiate with me anytime.
Back then, the ship was called the Havoc Marauder, and the name was meant to just be dropped to Marauder, but the Havoc part was slapped back on for the booklet Ships of the Republic and Separatists too. Since there's no official stats on this book, I would point you to these resources, which are in the description, if you want to read up more on ships in general. Hit the like button, comment, and share. All that stuff helps out with the algorithm. Make suggestions for future videos, subscribe, and check out the membership if you want to see more. But most important of all, remember, there's never a time when you don't need a gonk droid. And the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerdz? This video will be a complete breakdown of the Acclamator-class assault ship. We'll see the context surrounding its creation, a size comparison, take a look inside the ship and understand how it all worked, and then cover its history and all the different variants from the Clone Wars to Imperial era. Let's start with the context. When a Mune banker named Higo Damask traveled to the extragalactic world of Kamino to feel out the possibility of creating a clone army, the most difficult obstacle was to work with the human genome, being an ever unpredictable species, while the easiest part was manufacturing the millions of arms, armor, explosives, and ships and vehicles from the AT-RT to Venator, as Kuat Drive Yards and their subsidiary Rathana Heavy Engineering had been in the business of plunging a galaxy into war for more millennia than most species had space travel. As Old Republic Fleet Admiral Ago once put it, quote, "Since the dawn of the Republic, Kuat Drive Yards has been the exclusive supplier of many of our greatest warships," end quote. Roughly 800 years before the Clone Wars, the incredibly mineral-rich wild space planet of Rathana was discovered, and promptly bought up by KDY. Here, the subsidiary Rathana Heavy Engineering would be essentially just an extension of the parent company, layers upon layers to avoid Republic intervention, operating for far longer than any politician, and amassing more wealth than entire star systems, causing many to feel companies like Kuat Drive Yards were the true rulers of the galaxy. Much like the way Higo Damask, secretly a Sith known as Darth Plagueis, would also guide galactic affairs from the shadows. When the cloners placed the largest private order in history in the year 31 BBY, just months after the Battle of Naboo, within the company, all work on these machines of war fell under the top-secret Project Icefang, and they even undertook the arduous task of maintaining what became in essence their own private hyperspace lane, directly from Rathana to Kamino, going through the Rishi Maze. Keep in mind that canon novels like Master and Apprentice, and tons of Legends books as well, note the intense drama around systems and their hyperspace lanes, how difficult it was to maintain smaller lanes as celestial objects move through space, and how the Republic often did not put up enough credits to maintain some systems, effectively cutting them off like an old town losing a railroad stop. And so think about the power of Kuat Drive Yards to maintain this private lane on their own. In the stilt cities of Kamino, Rathana creations like the ATTE were used in their massive training facilities, while the Mandalorian trainers of Jango's Khoi Valdar worked with the clones to train on these vessels in Kaminoan space. I think we often overlook just how incredible this must have been for those Mandalorian mercs, but for a time the entire Republic military was first in their hands. So just imagine the glee these warriors had being able to play with toys of this size. At a length of 752 meters, or nearly half a mile, it was 2/3 the length of the Venator, and more than twice the Arquitans, while being 460 meters, or more than a quarter mile wide, which was 84% that of the Venator, or 27 LAATs across. And it had a height of 183 meters, or 600 feet, making it about 69% that of the Venator, or equal to 19 ATTEs. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be more than twice the length of the Nimitz-class carrier, 8.5 football stadiums across, and twice the height of the Statue of Liberty. And there's no official stats for this, but the size of the ramp seems to be about 29 meters or 95 feet across. I'm basing that on the cross-section and what we see with the Zillo Beast and vehicles coming down the ramp. Now let's take a look inside, but first we have to get past that armor, which is layers of Durasteel infused with neutronium. Almost every ship used Durasteel in the hull, but the Acclamator is the only known ship to be infused with this energy-dispersing material. Moving inside, let's start our tour with the power systems. Unlike the larger Star Destroyers, the main Hypermatter Annihilator reactor does not protrude, and we can see the frame structure that holds it in place. This ring is the fuel inlet manifold, which connects to these series of hypermatter fuel tanks, and we can see a subsidiary backup reactor located here. This fuel is so dense that it is magnitudes heavier than the rest of the ship. And while this fuel is so energy efficient, the insane power requirements of these enormous ships needed to generate shields, jump to hyperspace, and power these incredible engines means that they did need to be regularly refueled, either at space stations or with things like the Ultor-class replenishment ship, and later Imperial tanker, which have been around for years in Legends. Out of this reactor was this channel that emitted streams of particles out of the thrusters. The main thruster has the emitter split up into 8 electromagnetic thrust vectoring panels to control the direction of flow, while the auxiliary thruster is less powerful but enables the Acclamator to have greater maneuverability. Power generated for the rest of the ship is channeled through this power core, and this chamber is not subjected to the artificial gravity generators, while these tubes would take this energy out to other systems. Moving to the aft, we see these power system cooling neutrino radiator grills, which channel out heat from the reactor, the anti-grav repulsor generator, which is the tech that helps the ship float and get off the ground, and the grills also help disperse heat generated from the hyperdrive. Now this system produced a max power of 2 × 10 to the 23rd watts, while the shielding was 7 × 10 to the 22nd watts, with the thrusters pumping out a max acceleration of 3,500 G, and a top atmospheric speed of 1,200 km per hour or 746 miles per hour, making it equal to the incredibly fast TIE Fighter, and faster than the Venator, which is often praised for how quick it is. While in hyperspace, it's even more impressive for its role, being able to scramble the enormous complement of troops and vehicles across the entire galaxy faster than every capital ship, even every starfighter. It was quicker than Slave 1 in both atmosphere and in hyperspace, with only the Millennium Falcon under Han's modifications at peak being slightly faster in hyperspace with a 0.5 class rating. And this combined with all the fuel packed on board gave it a hyperdrive range of 250,000 light years, meaning it could cross the entire galaxy and back 2.5 times. For easy maintenance at Republic shipyards, the engine could be removed by itself via these engine servicing release hatches, and there was the power system maintenance vents. As for the armament, you can see the 4 heavy missile and torpedo launcher tubes, which could fire the standard loadout of 100 high-yield proton torpedoes and 20 assault concussion missiles. Spread across the surface were 24 point defense laser cannons for taking out starfighters, and 12 quad turbo laser turrets for every other type of ship from transports to capital ships. And when a target did not need to be captured, or if the enemy forces were in bunkers deep underground, several Acclamators would come together to execute a base Delta Zero fleet bombardment. This used the nuclear bomb level power of turbolaser batteries to liquefy rock, turning the crust of worlds into molten slag that would melt through until it reached the enemies. We can only see this one regional shield generator node, but these would have been all along the edge of the ship. And this bridge is much more slender than other Kuat models, and most of the bridge is actually in an area that has no windows, and instead provides tactical information via a holographic display, though there was still this small strip of windows towards the front, while the rest of this entire section was dedicated to sensor arrays. Now, looking at all these decks, there appear to be about 17 in total, having everything you would need for long voyages in space, mess hall recreation areas, storage for consumables that could reach 11,250 tons, equal to the weight of 13,235 dewbacks. There were logistic and strategy conference rooms for generals to meet in, but most of these rooms were the barracks for the 700-man crew, and 16,000 clone troopers. To put that in perspective, that's 8 times the troops aboard a Venator, and 1.6 times that even on the Imperial 1 class Star Destroyer, which shows just how perfect this ship is for its role. Not to slug it out in ship-to-ship combat, but to lead invasions intended to take entire planets. Which means an entire corps could pack into just 3 of these, and still have tons of room left over for auxiliary troops or local allies. And we haven't even talked about the vehicles yet. Along the periphery of the hangar were the 48 ATTE walkers, 36 self-propelled heavy artillery, and 320 speeder bikes. While the majority of the hangar floor would accommodate the LAAT gunship variants, which would be organized into their own landing zones, these alternating numbered rectangles on the floor. And there was a rail system that the gunships could attach to move them to different surface areas, along with the descending lift platform that took them to a lower maintenance bay, which could also be used for any of the other vehicles. Ships could enter and exit through several of the side hangar openings, though the main gunship exit was the ventral opening through which LAATs could leave side by side, while the larger carrier would have to exit single file, with the troops and vehicles exiting via the main ramps that open up on each side for rapid deployment, and could be used in concert with the repulsor system to hover in place without landing, so that almost any landing pad could be used even when it couldn't set down, like we see on Kamino. When it could touch down, these 3 enormous stabilizing legs would keep it level on any terrain. And what helps to hold this all together are the acceleration compensators and tensor integrity fields located at the forward and aft, which helps to offset the gravitational warpings of the repulsor lifts and the intense G-forces. Now, the first clone forces ever to be deployed were transported via the at least 12 Acclamators that delivered the LA-ATs, which would race into the Petronaki arena to rescue what was left of the Jedi Strike Team. After this successful opening to the Clone Wars, a massive military display was organized on the upper levels of Coruscant, showing the might of their new army, a sight so impressive that Masamita was temporarily lost in their beauty. The success of the Acclamator at Geonosis immediately sparked a race for Republic military contracts, with Kuat's greatest rival since the Old Republic, Rendili Star Drives, jumping into the fray and hoping to carve out a piece of the pie with spy ships and starships. But Kuat and their subsidiary Rathana were watching the credits roll in as the war raged on, with 1,000 Acclamators ordered in just the first weeks, at a price of 110 million credits each, which is nearly twice the price tag on a Venator. And there were specialized versions like the Nevuda-B, which carried 156 V-19 Torrents used during the Battle of Munilinst. And over the course of the war, almost every invasion would involve Acclamators, with Venators securing the star system and preventing reinforcements from making it to the surface. They would see notable uses on Christophsis, Teth, Seleucami, Camino, Sullust, and then to Umbara, Kiros, and Naboo. We saw its enormous hangar and cargo capacity used by Commander Wolf to deliver aid to Aileen, and during the capture of the orbital ring of Ringovinda. Though during the Battle of Ryloth, we saw that the CIS tactical supercomputers that were the T-Series droids did find a weakness in this ship, using the fact that the J-1 fired solid projectiles instead of plasma balls like a turbo laser, meaning they were less likely to be absorbed and diffused by the energy shield or the neutronium-infused armor plating, finding the perfect area near the thrusters to incapacitate the invading Acclamators. Toward the end of the war, they would produce the Acclamator II, which was inferior in every way, from a certain point of view, as it carried less vehicles, less troops, but it did require a much larger crew. That might seem like another bad thing, but when we see that this is a 28x multiplier, I think we're seeing more evidence of Palpatine's strategy to tie the population to the military. I've mentioned this in a lot of Imperial vehicle breakdowns, but the crew requirements shoot up in the Imperial era where no one can really make sense of them. My theory says that this makes sense when we look at things like the Tarkin and Thrawn books that show how the populations were made loyal, that the military was seen as a stable source of income for many otherwise hopeless people of remote parts of the galaxy. As the Empire pitched itself as at constant war with chaos, seen in the form of local criminals and anarchist rebel terrorists, they would make it seem like they were forced to take over businesses like Price's families on Lothal, and citizens would see signing up for the service as the best way to get out of your dangerous and poor city. So Palpatine took massive amounts of citizens away from the criminals and rebel recruiters of their hometown, stuck them in Imperial ships with strict command structures from loyal superiors, and now these people from all over the galaxy saw their success tied to the success of the Empire. Many regular Acclamator 1s were scrapped, or would see the sad fate of being retrofitted into a pure cargo vessel called the Imperial Cargo Ship, something that was the target of rebel attacks, most notably the hijacking of 4 of these in the year 0 ABY. And perhaps these, or other modified variants, are what Darth Vader once described as Acclamators that had become slave ships, though some in their original form still operated in the more remote areas of the Empire, while Kuat Drive Yards continued to dominate with a line of Imperial-class Star Destroyers, and the Victory, which was considered the spiritual successor to the Acclamator. So that's it for the breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. It was first introduced in Episode 2, with details coming from the Attack of the Clones Incredible Cross-Sections and Complete Cross-Sections books. There are some discrepancies, as they say that the bridge was completely windowless, while in the Clone Wars the depiction has a few windows. And in the original Battlefront 2 we can see it in a frigate role, though almost all other sources have it not used for capital ship combat when it could be avoided. Though of course the armament was powerful, and could if it needed to. And then for the details on the context of this ship, there's some from the Darth Plagueis novel, but a lot of it comes from the Essential Guide to Warfare. So that's it for the Acclamator. But most important of all, remember, when your enemy will melt through your planet's crust just to get you, just turn yourselves into the Laser Sword Magicians. And the Force will be with you. Always. You can always count on the Fishfolk Engineers. What's up, MetaNerdz? This video is going to be a complete breakdown of the obscure but incredible MC-40A light cruiser. We'll cover all of its stats, do some comparisons, and learn its history. So let's dive in. It was manufactured by Mon Calamari Shipyards. the same creator of all the Mon Cala ships with the MC title, but also things like the Viscount and starfighters like the Amphisub. At a length of 600 meters or 1,969 feet, it was the same size as an Interdictor-class cruiser, and about half the size of a Venator. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be nearly twice the length of a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, or twice the height of the Eiffel Tower. Its armament was impressive, with 14 turret-mounted medium turbolasers, 7 on each side, 2 forward-mounted concussion missile launchers, with a total payload of 50 missiles on board. The medium ion cannons numbered 18, with 4 on each side and 5 each at the forward and aft. And finally 6 heavy tractor beam projectors, 2 on each side, and then 1 forward and 1 in the aft. This is a great combination of weaponry, and I really like how it's specialized for their naval tactics, not just purely offense. It has more ion cannons than turbolasers, and went with the heavy tractor beam projectors. Both decisions are incredibly rare on any capital ship, and show that the captain would likely open up with volleys of ion cannon, disabling the enemy ship's engines and shields, use those heavy tractor beams to push around or lock in place Imperial ships that might be more than twice its size, all while blasting away with the turbolasers until the enemy was finally in position to be completely destroyed by those concussion missiles. Its portside hangar also had room for a squadron of starfighters, which usually meant 12 units, and as we can see, it would often employ Y-wings. This too is a great pairing, releasing those bombers after your ion cannons took out the enemy shields. All this makes for a really nasty surprise for any Imperial that might overlook this simple seeming craft. And we can't ignore its speed. In hyperspace, it was faster than an Imperial Star Destroyer, with a Class 1 hyperdrive and backup Class 15. That means a ship like this could be across the galaxy with the speed of top starfighters. And its megalight speed, or how fast it travels through space, was faster than the MC-80, but still slower than most Imperial craft. To compensate for this, they had those beautiful Mon Calamari-made shield generators, which are able to absorb incredible amounts of turbolaser fire, something that would screw up the tactics and timing relied on by Imperial captains, giving this relatively obscure ship an element of surprise, as its focus on those tractor beams, ions, and missiles, with this effectively larger HP, allowed it to really cause some havoc in Imperial fleets. It did take an enormous crew of 3,770, but this doesn't include a battalion of 650 soldiers. It also had consumables on board to last all of these people 2 years, and would only cost 15.5 million credits. That's about 1/10 the cost of an ISD, and about 1/7 the MC-80. So really a lot of bang for your buck. Or calamari flan, whatever you're paying with. As for its history, these ships would escape Mon Cala after the Imperial invasion, being a part of what is called the Mon Calamari Exodus fleet. Shipyards would be set up in space, and we see the Rebellion took full advantage of all of this ship's features. The MC-40A would often act as the anchor of smaller rebel attacks on larger Imperial fleets. Its shield allowed it to act like a blockade buster in some locations, and there are specific reports of how it would use those tractor beams to lock an enemy in place and then maneuver towards their aft, away from all those powerful forward-facing guns, and lay those rockets into the area just forward of the engine arrays on Star Destroyers, the area containing the main reactor, among many other crucial ship functions. It also served with Rebel Special Operations groups, its beefy shields absorbing and drawing the most Imperial fire, while the hangar could be outfitted with different craft to best serve the mission purpose. Basically, it would move your enemy into a better spot with the tractors, throw the whole enemy crew into chaos as the ion charges made all their systems go haywire, perfect for setting them up for infiltration and extraction by Rebel Spec Ops. This combo wasn't restricted to just ship-to-ship missions, but all those traits were used by Rebels to attack space stations and even planetary targets, with those ion cannons being able to knock out some city-sized shield generators. While its Class 1 hyperdrive meant that at a moment's notice it could quickly respond to new Rebel intelligence reports, things like the transport of some VIP or window to attack, and then be on the other side of the galaxy with the same speed as a starfighter through hyperspace. But it was also used to protect the Rebellion's crucial assets and VIPs. If somehow the MC-40A was the recipient of an ambush by Imperial Spec Ops, this shield tractor ion combo worked to break away from the combat and make some distance, maybe use the ion bolts to knock out the Imp's hold on you, and safely make your way through hyperspace to fight another day. It is said to have been used up past the Battle of Hoth and Endor, even fighting off the Yuuzhan Vong. So I hope you can see why I think it's a shame that we see so little of this ship, but at least we see that it retained all of its awesomeness in canon. Maybe you'll see it in some future show, but right now it's only appeared in canon in the books Starships and Speeders, and that's where a lot of these stats were retained, being previously laid out in the book Strongholds of Resistance, and making appearances in the Star Wars X-Wing and TIE Fighter games, as well as the comic Legacy War issue 5. The only thing that really changed was that in Legends its shields were relatively normal, a 1696 SBD rating, which is on par with something this size. But in canon, while not given a number, it states that it had exceptionally strong deflector shields, which allowed it to slug it out with much larger ships. So that's it for the MC-40A light cruiser. Be sure to comment your thoughts on this ship. Do you think it fits a good role, or would you just go with some of the larger MC ships? But most important of all, remember, Mon Cala engineering plus rebel hit-and-run tactics are the stuff Imperial nightmares are made of. And the Force will be with you. Always. We all know how Krennic got his credit stolen with the Death Star project, but also the amazing Delta-class shuttle would have never been produced if it wasn't for the keen eye of the director.
We stand here amidst my achievement, not yours!
What's up, MetaNerdz? This video will be a complete breakdown in history of the Delta-class T-3C shuttle. It was most famously used by director Orson Krennic, and it has a ton of features that make it one of the most unique shuttles in the galaxy. The Delta-class was manufactured by Cygnus Spaceworks and Sinar Fleet Systems, the creators of all the Empire's other iconic folding wing-style shuttles. These were officially called the Abecedarian line of shuttles, and the ship's engineer, Lamia Tyon, got the inspiration for these wings from her love of paper folding art, the Star Wars origami, and saw that it had a practical purpose of reducing the footprint in the hangar. With the wings in the upright position, the Delta had a height of 25.1 meters, or 82 feet and 4 inches, which is roughly an Ewok plus a Wookiee taller than an AT-AT. While its length of 14.39 meters, or 47 feet 2 inches, was more than twice that of the TIE Fighter. There are no official numbers for its width, but it appears to be around 50 meters or 164 feet when in flight, which would be about 8 TIE Fighters across. Now these long wing-like structures may seem impractical, but they were the result of some really interesting engineering. Almost all of the Imperial shuttles produced by Sinar Fleet Systems and Cygnus Spaceworks have these origami-inspired wings. The first reason was, as I mentioned, just to take up less room in the hangar. When its 4 landing pads came out, there was a nice sturdy base, with all of its profile going up instead of out to the sides. We take this for granted with the Empire, but just imagine how impractical something like the Naboo ships would be sitting inside of a military hangar. These wings also gave it better stability in the wide range of atmospheres that the Delta-class would be slicing through. But I would say the most impressive engineering aspect is that each of these wings are lined with deflector shield projectors. Ships have deflector shield generators usually located in the main body of the ship, often right near the bridge or cockpit, but it is your projectors that send out the shield to create a protective bubble around the ship. That's why you can have phrases like,
Switch all power to front deflector screen.
Try and hold them off. Angle the deflector shield while I make the calculations for the jump to light speed.
So it isn't like there's separate shield generators in each of those locations, but shorthand for saying that you want to put more power into projecting that shield to a particular area. But in the case of the Delta-class, they actually did put 2 separate deflector shield generators, and then designed these wings so that they split up space around it into 3 separate parts. And each of these wings were lined with multiple shield projectors. 2 generators and numerous projectors gave you a highly refined response to any incoming attacks. And we can imagine that mastering this complex shield projector system required some of the top talent in the Empire. And the Delta-class had a 6-man crew, a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, gunner, comms operator, and engineer. And with their talents, they were able to triangulate the projection of the shields, or even triangulate to multiple locations at once since you had those 2 separate generators. All of this meant that it wasn't just a vague forward or rear, but pinpointed to anywhere in this sphere of coverage. The wings also housed the secure HoloNet and subspace transmitter arrays, allowing the Delta-class to stay in constant contact with the Empire, even while in the most remote parts of the galaxy or even in hyperspace. And then the tips of each of these wings also had their own laser cannon, in addition to the 2 dual laser cannons mounted on the hull. All of these systems required an enormous amount of power and fuel, which made up a majority of the volume of the interior of the main body, which is also where they house the enormous pair of ion engines. We get a good look at the thrust that these can generate when it took off from the secret weapons facility on Iadu. When the engines engaged, they sent Jyn Erso flying off the platform. These SFS 215 ion engines could get it up to a top atmospheric speed of 1,000 km per hour, or 621 miles per hour, making it just a bit slower than the X-Wing, tied with the Sentinel-class shuttle, and an impressive 150 km per hour faster than the Lambda. This engine array would also house the hyperdrive, which included the top-of-the-line SFS IG-45 Class 1 hyperdrive, along with a backup Class 10. This gave the shuttle the ability to transport its VIPs across the galaxy in as quick a time as possible, being faster than an Imperial Star Destroyer, and only highly modified ships like the Millennium Falcon were faster. On top of all this, the entire ship was wrapped in this radar scrambling skin, this black paint job containing material that was similar to the Death Trooper's armor, which was covered in a spray polymer called Reflect, something that would alter the electromagnetic waves utilized by most sensors. As for its history, originally Sinar Fleet Systems created the Delta-class as a sort of concept ship, something that could test the theory of a stealth shuttle with these great shield-projecting wings. But like most awesome concept designs, they never intended to actually produce these in great numbers. No Delta-class shuttles were slated to be incorporated into the Empire until director Krennic set his eyes on the design. He was attracted to the look, but he fell in love with the ship's capabilities, being the ultimate shuttle for one who wished to traverse the galaxy quickly while remaining undetected, and all the while be impervious to any chance of attack by pirate gangs or rebels with that impressive shield array. The official cost once it was sold to the Empire was 160,000 credits, which is only 20k more than the Lambda, and a little more than 2 TIE fighters, and the one that Krennic picked up was designated ST-149. But to put this ship in context, it's important to remember that most of the Imperials wanted their position for the privileges it provided. In the time of the Empire, political power was the ultimate status symbol and best means to luxury. No longer strength, hard work, intellect, or your credits. And as you would expect, the Imperial shuttles had lavish quarters for the important imps on board, but not Krennic's shuttle. The cabin was specialized for the 6 Death Troopers that escorted him everywhere, and even his personal quarters were very Spartan. The Delta could carry 30 passengers, which in Krennic's case might just be filled with more troopers or other research VIPs. And your standard amount of supplies on board were said to last for 3 months. Though not a mainstay like the Lambda or Sentinel, Krennic would use this ship for over a decade. We saw it in 0 BBY being used to go kidnap Galen Erso, later at the research station on Iadu, and then to Mustafar to visit Darth Vader's castle, before meeting its ultimate end on Scarif. The shuttle would have likely been destroyed by the debris raining down from the main tower on Scarif after Krennic got sniped by the Death Star. If not by this debris, then it was likely vaporized as the explosion spread. That's it for its breakdown, but there's some really cool additional facts and behind-the-scenes stuff I wanted to mention. There was one other person that was known to use the Delta-class shuttle. It was Imperial Inspector Magna Tolvan, who used it during her hunt for the hacker and archaeologist Dr. Afra between the years 0 to 3 ABY. There's also kind of a funny lore play on the intense rivalry between Krennic and Tarkin, with Tarkin always finding ways to appear more important than Krennic, being something that is mirrored in their ships. Tarkin has an actual stealth ship, the Carrion Spike, that can go invisible not just to equipment but even the naked eye, while Krennic of course only has the next best thing, just under it, number 2 on the list of best stealth ships in the galaxy as it were. Also, the Carrion Spike was considered to be the fastest ship in the Imperial Navy, despite both having a Class 1 hyperdrive. This may be the result of a variety of factors that make it slightly faster when traveling through the Blue Void, but it's also hilarious to think that they might be the same speed, and Tarkin's ship just gets the title of fastest in the Empire. There's also a funny story with Krennic's personal aide, Captain Dunstig Taro, whose role it was to keep Krennic up to date with important Imperial messages, while also acting as the ship's pilot for a majority of the time. Taro came to love the Delta-class so much that he nicknamed the ST-149 the Pterodon, the ancient flying reptile having a similar profile with its enormous wings and its head protrusion, while also being a playoff of his own name. The comic that was mentioned earlier was Dr. Afra 16, but when it appears here and in the Rogue One comic adaptation, it has a red engine glow despite being blue everywhere else. The Delta-class also has its own LEGO set, and a ton of books that have expanded on its details, including the Rogue One Visual Guide, Cyclopedia of Starfighters, and most in-depth was the Dawn of the Rebellion RPG Guide. So that's it for the Delta-class T3C shuttle. Be sure to hit that like button if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more, and be sure to check out the description. But most important of all, remember, Erso had the genius, Krennic had the vision, but Tarkin understood politics. And the Force will be with you, always. Trade disputes can be resolved through diplomacy, debate, or an army. What's up, MetaNerdz? Today we're going to be taking a tour of the Multi-Troop Transport, otherwise known as the MTT. We'll explore the role it played for both the Trade Federation and the CIS, delve into its cross-section, and even that time, the MTT seemingly took flight. Designed and manufactured by Bactoid Armor Workshops, the MTT was used at first by the Neimoidian-led Trade Federation. There is very little to no information about their deployment before the famous Battle of Naboo. And so before we talk history, let's take an in-depth look at the specifications of this behemoth. The multi-troop transport is quite a humble name for such a monster of a machine. With a length of 35.6 meters, or approximately 117 feet long, it was longer than 19 steamrolled Gungans, but still considerably shorter than the Republic's A6 Juggernaut. And at 10.54 meters, or almost 35 feet tall, the MTT was a iota higher than 2 Fambas. Cargo-wise, it's estimated that the MTT could haul 12 tons. That's enough to haul 112 OOM battle droids, including their blasters, and still have enough energy to add 3.5 dewbacks. If one of these beasts showed up here on Earth, it would be as long as 14 smart cars, taller than 4 M1 Abrams tanks, and would have enough hauling power to transport 879 bars of gold. At a sluggish 35 kilometers per hour or only 22 miles per hour, the MTT isn't going to be winning any pod races. This speed makes it very vulnerable to attacks, which is why we always see it escorted with AATs, STAPs, and battle droids, or holding back towards the rear of the battlefront. To have an Earth comparison, just so you know how truly sluggish this thing is, the record for the fastest human sprint is 28 miles per hour. But then again, Usain Bolt wasn't carrying 12 tons of nasally death.
Roger, roger.
The MTT was only armed with 2 twin blaster cannons, mounted on a rotatable ball turret on the front of the vehicle. While extremely powerful and accurate, having even been said to shoot down starfighters, the placement of these guns made the transport dangerously vulnerable from any angle besides the front. And while we're on the subject, that front of the MTT is heavily armored, and not just to protect its portable pop-up army. It could also use its rounded face as a battering ram, knocking its way through walls and trees, like we saw it doing as the Trade Federation droid army was clearing a path through the dense Naboo forest. Maybe Ventress should have brought a few of these to Ragosa. There's even more going on inside of the MTT, which we can see thanks to one incredible cross-section. Starting up at the top, we see that the MTT is piloted by a battle droid, while another serves as the gunner, something similar to what we see in the AAT. These vehicles were usually on pre-programmed paths set up by the droid control ship, but the pilot could deviate from these orders when necessary. Since the model we're looking at is the original, as we move down we can get a closer look at this vehicle's most infamous feature, the droid racks. Factoid Armor Workshop, who also made the B1s, really took advantage of designing this thing with droids in mind, as I can't really see any other army being able to take advantage of this system. The droids were folded into the fetal position, loaded up into 4 smaller racks, and stowed away safely until duty called. The base model of MTT could carry up to 112 standard OOM battle droids, and we'll discuss the variants in just a sec. We can see here that the rack is also operated by 2 OOM battle droids, an overseer and an operator. The entire forward interior, as expected, is dominated by the MTT's main feature, and so the other essentials of this transport were housed in the back. You can see the power generating cooling systems, not to mention the many vents and fins that would make sure the MTT doesn't overheat. Interestingly, the main power generators are said to be provided by Kuat drive yards, who became known throughout the galaxy for their Republic warships. I guess when both sides are secretly run by the Sith, it doesn't really matter where the credits come from. But if you want some more information on that, we actually covered this in an old video, explaining how Kuat drive yards would have ended up in the CIS, but how Palpatine's machinations made them a vehement supporter of the Republic. Now that we've covered the original, let's quickly run down the variations. As war broke out, the methodical deployment of battle droids became increasingly obsolete. To counter this, some MTTs were outfitted with new racks to drop B1 battle droids onto the field already standing upright. While this did fix the issue with the speed of deployment, it did limit how many droids could be brought to the battlefront. This design seemed to be considered an improvement, as we see MTTs throughout the Clone Wars being used to quickly drop off super battle droids, of which it could only carry 12 at a time. We see them doing just that during the Battle of Dathomir, littering this red jungle world with dozens of clankers. This version, as well as others used by the CIS, were given a paint job to better match the blue and gray look of the Confederacy. Another time to see the MTT variant was during Wat Tambor's occupation of Ryloth, where this sleazy Skakoan used 2 of these transports to haul treasure back to his palace. While we never see the full interior of these models, it could be assumed that the droid racks were removed, giving Tambor even more cargo space for his riches. New model or not, we do get to see a new feature of the MTT, the cargo hatch, where Mace Windu alongside Razor and Stack were hiding. We see that it has more than enough room for the cargo, and maybe Tambor would have gotten away with it if he put a couple droidekas in there as well. As we see, the cross-section also says how it was great for transporting destroyer droids. The history of the MTT is pretty straightforward, having almost nothing before its appearance on the plains of Naboo. The Trade Federation deployed at least 12, which combined could deploy 1,452 droids. Flanked by AATs and STAPs, the MTTs stayed out of the line of fire as the army that they brought to bear had seemingly won the day. That was until a certain chosen one interfered, shutting down the entire droid army. After their debut, we see the MTTs being used throughout the Clone Wars as previously mentioned. But Factoid also continued to innovate new transports for the CIS. These included the MUT and Trade Federation Troop Transport. Think flying MTT, but ultimately the multi-troop transport remained the go-to vehicle for most of the war. Other notable times that we see the MTT in use was during the Battle of Kashyyyk and even the Battle of Coruscant. When unable to use the MTT to deploy troops, the CIS often made use of the HMP droid gunship to quickly fly in clankers alongside a devastating barrage of suppressive fire, like we saw in Scipio. The influence of the MTT's design was also seen in one of the deadliest creations ever brought out by Factoid, the Super Tank. Like all things Confederacy, the MTT saw the end of its glory days when Darth Vader ended the Clone Wars on Mustafar. While it has been said that the MTT did see later action in the Galactic Civil War, it did not play a notable role in any key battles. Well, that about wraps it up for the MTT, but you definitely want to stick around for these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. It was originally designed to look like a train, but the final look for the MTT took a cue from nature thanks to Doug Chang, with its tall facade and chin guns made to resemble an African elephant's skull and tusks. And while not much changed regarding the MTT and its switch from Legends to canon, it did receive a bit of meddling. It went from 31 meters long in Legends to 35.6 in canon. Strangely though, it shrunk in height, going from 13 meters tall to just 10.54 meters. Cross-section comes from Star Wars Complete Cross-Sections, and additional information comes from Star Wars Encyclopedia of Starfighters and Other Vehicles, and Ultimate Star Wars. But most important of all, remember that the MTT, an entire army, is just a carry-on, and the Force will be with you, always. These things are proof that you can have great action scenes that are guided by the lore, not breaking it. What's up, MetaNerdz? In today's video, we're going to be talking about the All-Terrain Armored Cargo Transport, or the AT-ACT. We will do a complete breakdown of its stats, see how it was used on multiple planets, and end with some behind-the-scenes facts. The AT-ACT was produced by Kuat Drive Yards, the company that produced almost all of the walkers for the Republic and Empire. Though technically not for sale, word on the HoloNet is that these run the Empire about $125K a piece, just over twice the cost of a TIE fighter. At a glance, the AT-ACT looks like it's just a simple variant of the AT-AT, but it actually has some really big design differences. For starters, you got the size. The cargo transport had a height of 31.85 meters or 104 feet, making it about as tall as an AT-AT with an AT-ST standing on top. And at 34.9 meters or 115 feet long, it was 14 meters longer than the standard AT-AT, being more than an entire X-Wing longer, space that was all used for this large cargo bay. This area was able to carry up to 550 cubic meters of cargo, which could hold a total weight of 5,000 metric tons, about equal to the weight of 6,135 dewbacks. If it showed up here on Earth, it would stand taller than a 10-story building, be about half the length of a 747, have the cargo space of 16 20-foot shipping containers, and haul more cargo than you could fit on the backs of 46,000 horses. They had these specifically designed cargo pods that were used for transport, which had this distinctive orange coloring, a modular system that allowed these pods to be picked up by other ships and vehicles. And we can even see that they were designed to be taken off with this conveying system. This additional height did provide for a longer stride, but came at the cost of structural stability. U-Wings at the Battle of Scarif were able to exploit this weakness and bring the whole thing crashing down with a single mounted Roba M45 heavy repeating ion cannon. Whereas on Hoth, we saw that the more powerful P-Tower laser cannons proved ineffective on a standard AT-AT. So how is this possible? Well, it is due to a very important difference in the design of this cargo walker. To provide extra power to move this enormous cargo, the AT-ACT has stronger engines. Which is simple enough, but to help with the fact that all of this new weight is set on top of longer legs, the load would be supported by an electromagnetic tensor field. A tensor field essentially nullifies the weight of gravity on objects, making them a whole lot easier to transport. Tensor fields aren't often mentioned in Star Wars lore as much as other types of technology, but you have seen them used before. Some examples of other ships with tensor fields are the C-9979 landing craft, which would generate them in their wings, in order to prevent them from sagging under the extreme weight of all the AATs. And a tensor field failing was the culprit of the invisible hand breaking in half during the Battle of Coruscant, as the ship simply couldn't handle the gravitational pull without one. And with the AT-ACT, we see that the tensor field generators are in the knee, right where the gunner is aiming. With all those ion shots on target, the complete weight of the walker is now bearing down on this single leg. The full, non-nullified load proves too much, and so we don't see it exploding in a ball of flames, but buckling and snapping from supporting too much extra weight. A cool little detail that shows how action can be logically guided by well-written lore, not just dismissed in favor of action scenes, which is so often the case when it comes to things like shields, where we simply have to say that the plot willed it. Its large cargo hold was monitored by stevedore droids, which we unfortunately don't have a current visual of them, but they would help to divide the loads on the walker to make trips more manageable, as some of these experimental materials are described as ultra-dense. And some other interesting things to point out is that the red glow is from an infrared force field generated in the cockpit. The air filters for the vehicle are located right behind the head on the main body, and these walkers use the same solid fuel slugs like we saw in the AT-AT. On board the ACT, you would have a crew of 2 and space for up to 10 passengers, which is 20 less than the AT-AT. Because of its cargo role, overall it had much less armor, but the section just over the cargo container is reinforced. And despite not being intended for assault, it could still defend Imperial assets, coming with 2 Taman-back MS-2 heavy laser cannons, which would be able to blow apart enemy infantry and easily punch a hole in any attacking ground vehicles. The first time we see the AT-ACT in use is during the numerous construction attempts of Fortress Vader on Mustafar. The Sith Lord consulted an ancient Sith ghost known as Moment to help in the construction of a building that would focus darkside energy. The design of the fortress would start off being rather different from the final version that we would see, with each of its predecessors having a very unlucky history, each being destroyed in some unforeseen way. This would happen 8 times, with the 9th building being the one we see in Rogue One. Due to the harsh nature of Mustafar, Vader would use AT-ACTs and OICTs to build each of the different versions. These would be very useful in safely transporting building materials across the hazardous hellscape. Not only would the lava be dangerous to typical vehicles, but on several occasions, the troops and vehicles stationed at the construction site would be attacked by the local Mustafarians, who weren't too thrilled with a Dark Lord of the Sith plotting his castle right on their home. On one occasion, 3 Force-sensitive Mustafarians would use their power in an attempt to flood the castle with lava, killing off almost all of the Imperial troops and destroying most of the vehicles. Vader would be able to survive the attack by using the wreckage of an AT-ACT that had been swept up by the lava. And so Vader has this vehicle to thank for him not losing any more limbs to the fires of Mustafar. The next time we would see this walker would be on the tropical paradise world of Scarif. Here the AT-ACTs were used to transport heavy cargo and materials across the shallow waters surrounding the Citadel, a highly secretive research base as well as an archive for the Galactic Empire. In the Year Zero BBY, the Rebel Alliance would mount an attack on the Citadel and a gambit to gain access to the Death Star plans. The rebels would infiltrate the compound using a stolen Eta-class, and a ground battle would ensue. The rebels would then come under intense fire from at least 4 AT-ACTs. This would turn the tide in the Empire's favor, but the victory was cut short when several rebel starfighters would get past the shield ring. These starfighters easily destroyed all the walkers, paving a clear way for the rebels to the Citadel. This battle showcased that when against something light like infantry, he was able to defend itself from small arms fire, and even take a rocket directly to the head, just shrugging it off. But due to its overall lack of armor, it is at a heavy disadvantage to purpose-made starfighters. The X-Wings having more firepower than most starfighters, and packed a way bigger punch than the T-47 airspeeders on Hoth. These could also be seen on the shipyards of Kuat Drive Yards, transporting materials for building the weapons and ships used by the Empire. Like its use on Scarif, these wouldn't see any action until the facility came under attack. 5 years after the Battle of Yavin, the New Republic launched a bombing campaign against the shipyard ring, in an effort to cut off the Imperial remnants supplied to arms and armor. KDY would be forced to use any available assets they had to fend off the New Republic starships. AT-ATs, AT-STs, AT-ACTs, and even the remaining AT-TEs would be used in the defense of these shipyards. But they would not be able to keep the New Republic at bay, and Imperial forces eventually surrendered. And some of these also saw service on the Wookiee home planet of Kashyyyk, where they were used to transport building materials for new Imperial bases, and even transport some Wookiee slaves. After the fall of the Empire and 5 ABY at the Battle of Jakku, Imperial forces on the various worlds across the Empire would surrender and leave. One AT-ACT would be left behind on the Wookiee homeworld, where it would slowly deteriorate and be covered by the natural environment. By 7 ABY, this AT-ACT would be almost completely covered in vegetation, and Han Solo would come across this walker during one of his trips to Kashyyyk. So that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. It first appeared in Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and a tale of it being used on Mustafar comes from the Darth Vader comic series, issues 23 and 24. The stories of them on Kuat came from Star Wars Insider, and Han Solo finds one on Kashyyyk in the novel Last Shot. And it should be noted that the AT-ACT has some potential inconsistencies across various sources. For starters, it's said that it has longer legs to give it a faster stride over the normal AT-AT, but its top speed is 50 km per hour, or 31 miles per hour, whereas the AT-AT tops out at 60 km per hour, or 37 miles per hour. Perhaps its speed is much quicker than it would have been if it had all that cargo on those smaller legs, but it's still incredibly slow. As many fans have pointed out, something like the Juggernaut seems like it would have fit all of the Empire's goals while still being a lot quicker. And since its wheels are actually spinning metal discs, not rubber, it would have done fine on Mustafar too. Probably better in the marshes of Kashyyyk and the sands of Scarif. Another possible inconsistency is that with the pilots of the AT-ACT. The visual dictionary for Rogue One states that any qualified driver of the Empire could pilot the AT-ACT, and that they had no specified pilot corps. But they get this completely different look and helmet, and so if not a separate corps, they definitely went by the title of AT-ACT pilot. And just before we end, a little shout out to the OICT mentioned earlier. Currently, there is almost no information regarding it, aside from its appearance in the Darth Vader comic and a small on-screen appearance in Solo. There's just no stats or history on it. Funny enough, not even what the acronym stands for. The C in CT probably stands for crane or just cargo. But most important of all, remember, these walkers used to strike fear into the rebels, until they took an ion cannon to the knee. And the Force will be with you, always.
Hang on.
With some creativity and expert piloting, this thing can quickly become a Special Forces shuttle. What's up, MetaNerdz? This video is all about the Eta-class shuttle. We'll get into all the interesting ways this ship was utilized during the Clone Wars, talk about the executive variant, and we'll do a full breakdown of its stats and behind-the-scenes facts. The Eta-class was manufactured by Cygnus Spaceworks, the same company that made the Nu, Theta, and Lambda, really locking down the shuttle market for a couple decades. And this was mostly due to their low cost and high performance. At 100,000 credits, it was about a third of the cost of the Lambda, but surprisingly, it was more expensive than the Nu class. What is also odd is that its top atmospheric speed is only 750 km per hour, or 466 miles per hour, making it slower than the bulkier Nu class that often carried cargo. So perhaps that's just stock, and many of these are modded by the Jedi Order, because in space, the Eta-class is known for racing through CIS defenses. And even when we see it in atmosphere, it can still zip around with ease. Its Class 2 hyperdrive is average for these types of craft, slower than many fighters in the Venator, but quicker than your average consumer freighter. It is not shielded, a risky choice to make it one of your go-to shuttles for the Jedi Order. I guess no better force field than trusting in the Force itself. Its armament is 3 light laser cannons, which is great for just fending off fighters and interceptors while it tries to escape, as it really shouldn't be initiating any dogfights. Instead, the Republic and Jedi Order mainly use these as a standard transport, carrying up to 10 passengers at a time in this spacious cabin area, while also bringing along a complement of 2 Undakar-class jump speeders, very compact, foldable speeder bikes. All of that is why it also made an excellent Special Forces shuttle. It could quickly get across a planet, or weave through CIS fleets, actually set down on a Separatist ship or space station, and lock into place via its magnetic landing gear. If in space, there was plenty of storage room in the Eta-class for the gear needed for a spacewalk. And while on-world, these 2 compact speeder bikes could be used by troopers or Jedi to scout ahead. We saw this method used to get behind the enemy lines during the Battle of Ringo Vinda and the rescue of Eth Koth. With the latter example, we can see that with the right pilot, you could come out of hyperspace just before the CIS fleet, and the craft was quick and nimble enough to be flown closely along whatever capital ship was your target, allowing you to evade detection by sensor arrays. And we see more of this ship's maneuverability when a C-70 was destroyed as a Jedi escape, nearly taking out the Eta-class with it. Another excellent feature is the folding wings and fine-tuned repulsor system. At a length of 14.2 meters or 47 feet, it was 2 Wookiees shorter than the Nu class, and about 9 meters shorter than the Y-wing. With its wings open, it had a height of 21 meters, or 69 feet, making it about 2 Wookiees taller than the Nu, and about a Jawa shorter than the AT-AT. And at 26 meters or 86 feet wide, it is more than 3 Wookiees wider than the ARC-170. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be taller than a 6-story building, longer than a school bus, and wider than 7 lanes of traffic. Keep in mind that like the V-19 Torrent starfighter, it isn't like those dimensions are all filled in. It isn't that big a target. And with the pilot's ability to maneuver these wings while in flight, it creates some annoying variation for the CIS targeting computers. But primarily, this wing folding feature was designed to take up less space in the hangar bay, allowing for hundreds of ships total, including starfighters, bombers, and many shuttles inside of a single Venator. With just that one level hangar, you would prefer your ships to take up more vertical space than horizontal. which is why so many ships like the Eta, Nu, and V-19 have this wing folding feature. While it also had incredibly fine-tuned series of repulsor lifts, giving it this ability to make these sharp but smooth turns and set down in these hectic warship hangars, and also on busy planet-side landing pads. As for its history, before the war broke out, these were known to transport senators and other Republic VIPs, but it was used so much by the Jedi during the Clone Wars that both Cad Bane and Darth Maul instantly know that Jedi have arrived when they see the distinct tri-wing shuttle set down.
Jedi, brother! You found us!
And speaking of Maul, just a quick nod to his incredible strength in the Force. We see that he can single-handedly force pull an Eta off a cliff. One of these shuttles would take Ahsoka to Mandalore during her mission to help stem corruption, and it later took her, Kenobi, and Anakin to a different plane of existence. Without them knowing, when they were brought to the mysterious Force world of Mortis, they popped out of the normal galaxy.
So we are at the rendezvous point, and there's no sign of you in our scanners.
They don't know who or how they landed the Eta-class in this double pyramid-shaped object, but the shuttle would become their home base here. We see that the maintenance area is located right under the floor panels in the passenger section, and allows for comfortable access to most major systems like the hyperdrive, engines, and computer systems. And another neat feature is that the co-pilot can completely take over the controls, with Obi-Wan swerving the shuttle away from a tower when Anakin was pursuing a target a little too closely for Kenobi's tastes. And later we would see that this was one of Palpatine's preferred methods of travel.
Prepare my ship.
Darth Sidious arrives on Mandalore on a variant of the Eta-class called the Republic Executive Shuttle. It is said to have many upgrades, the details of which are still classified, but we can make out some differences in the cockpit bulb, while the main body appears to be bulkier. This most likely points to powerful engines and larger Tibanna-class reserves for these larger and likely stronger laser cannons, coming up from light laser cannons to medium or even heavy. The placement of the weapons on these wings, as well as the general shape of the wings, are also slightly different. And though more rare, we do see one of these Republic Executive Shuttles with the fleet over Ringo Vinda. And we learned that your standard Eta-class was great for search and rescue, as well as some stealthy operations behind enemy lines, with Anakin, Rex, and Fives using it to both search the wreckage of Tup's transport, before it covertly delivers them to the underside of the planetary ring, allowing for a spacewalk to the CIS-held hangar bay. So that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. The Eta-class was brought to life in the Clone Wars via inspiration from the original concept art for the Lambda-class, which was created by Joe Johnston for Return of the Jedi. Its first appearance was in the episode Grievous Intrigue, Season 2, Episode 9, and has been expanded upon in the Legend sourcebook Endless Vigil, and the canon sourcebook Encyclopedia of Starfighters and Other Vehicles. But most important of all, remember, don't judge a shuttle by its speed stats, and the Force will be with you. Always. It's hard to fight off claims of corruption when the politicians are the ones riding around in the flyest shuttles. What's up, MetaNerdz? In today's video, we're going to be talking about the H2 Executive Shuttle, a smaller shuttle used during the time of the Republic, mainly by senators and other high-ranking officials. The H2 was constructed by Slane & Corporal, the same company that would produce the V-19 Torrent and T-6 shuttle for the Republic, and who would later go on to produce the B-Wing and MG-100 Star Fortress. Its cost is unknown, but the H2 was 14.6 meters long, or 48 feet, making it about 8 meters shorter than the T-6 shuttle, or equal to the length of an ARC-170 plus a Wookiee. It had a decent top speed of 875 kilometers per hour, or 544 miles per hour, making it about 50 kilometers per hour faster than the new class. For crew, it would only require a single pilot, but had comfortable accommodations for up to 5 passengers and a bunch of luggage. The H2 had a much more sleek design compared to the other shuttles in this era used by the Republic. The majority of those shuttles were built by Cygnus Spaceworks, like the Nu and Eta, and they had a much more utilitarian design, whereas the H2 seems to be designed for looks. The front cabin had plenty of transparent steel windows, giving the passengers and pilot a beautiful view. The wings of the H2 were able to fold closer to the body, making this craft easier to store in smaller spaces. And this wing folding feature is a staple of Slane & Corporal products. Now, we're unsure if the cutouts in these wings serve a purpose or if they're just to make it look cool, as this was a luxury craft meant to make a statement. And given that it was mainly a diplomatic ship, it had no onboard weapons. And surprisingly, if you go with the stock model, you don't even get a hyperdrive. First we ever see the H2 shuttles in the year 21 BBY at the peak of the Clone Wars. Given that now it was a galaxy at war, the Republic knew that the capital of Coruscant was always under threat of invasion, and that the Supreme Chancellor would be the #1 target. In the event of an emergency, an H2 was installed inside of the Republic Executive Building as a means to escape from any threat that might arise. This H2 is painted a dark blue color, very similar to the Senate Commandos, and it would have this Senate symbol on the bow. Despite the capital city being so well protected, it would eventually come under attack, but not from the Separatists, instead from the mighty Zillo Beast. This creature would rampage through the city in search of the one who ordered its imprisonment, Chancellor Palpatine. It would finally find its target in the Republic Executive Building and begin its attack. To protect the Chancellor, Anakin, Padme, and their droids would board the H2 stationed in that building. It was able to quickly take off, but it was grabbed by the Zillo Beast, and then it tried to crush everyone inside. What we see here is either a testament to the Zillo Beast's intelligence, choosing not to just crush the craft, but to look Palpatine in the eye before he killed him. Or perhaps the H2 is so well constructed that he actually couldn't crush it. It's very easy to think that the escape craft made for Chancellor Palpatine would have some heavy modifications. Reinforced hull bracing, thicker plate armor, all kinds of stuff to make this ship more secure during an attack. Just how luxury vehicles here on Earth are often reinforced with added layers of defense for VIPs. In order to escape this attack, Anakin would use his lightsaber to slice the forward section of the shuttle in half, disconnecting the part that the beast was holding onto and letting the cockpit slide off onto the building. It would then escape on foot thereafter. So despite it being cut in two, the H2 did still buy the Chancellor some time, even if it couldn't get him off of Coruscant. Now that's the only time we see it in the service of the Republic, but interestingly, the H2 ended up in the hands of some Separatists. In fact, we actually see it with Separatist senators more than Republic ones. This either shows that Slain and Corporal, despite producing one of the main fighters of the Republic, as well as a shuttle used exclusively by the Jedi, was still neutral in this war and sold ships to whoever it wanted. Or that several of these H2s were produced and purchased before the outbreak of the Clone Wars. Both are plausible theories, so let me know what you think down in the comments. We see an H2 that is painted in old Senate red used by CIS Senator Mina Bonteri. Ahsoka and Padme would hitch a ride on this particular H2 to meet with Bonteri behind the Republican Jedi's backs in an attempt to start peace talks to end the war. What's interesting to note about this H2 is that its wings don't fold down and then backwards. Instead, they just fold up. Why it's different with this particular version is unknown. Perhaps it's an older model, because this version would take up more space in a conventional hangar. Rush Clovis, another Separatist senator, would also have an H2 shuttle for personal use. This one would be named the Scipio, after his homeworld, and will be painted a goldish bronze color. And this H2 has the same folding wing action as the one we saw with Palpatine. Once again, Padme would be on board, as she would take the Scipio to Clovis's personal residence during their meeting with the banking clan, all in an attempt to pull a loan for the Republic in the year 19 BBY. And despite its widespread use, it's actually something that we don't see any more of after this year. So that's it for its history, and the only cool behind the scenes facts is that it made its debut in the Clone Wars animated series, with its first appearance in the episode The Zillo Beast Strikes Back. The red variant is seen in the episode Heroes on Both Sides, and the Scipio is in the episode An Old Friend. While some of the extra details about this come from the new canon book Star Wars Encyclopedia of Ships and Other Vehicles. But most important of all, remember, cutting it in half with a lightsaber does void the warranty, and the Force will be with you, always. From being a simple freighter to a transport for the Republic, sometimes used to smuggle death sticks and slaves, and seen by a future mono-limbed Sith Lord to be the perfect place to spit game.
You're exactly the way I remember you in my dreams.
This ship has seen a lot. What's up, MetaNerdz? In this video, we're going to talk about the Bodajef AA-9 freighter liner, also known as the Coruscant Freighter. Its specs are the same in both Legends and canon. It was built by Bodajef Shipyards, who would also produce the SS-54 assault ship. And we can see that their look is to have these large engines at the end of their wings, a sort of signature design just like how you can tell when it's a Corellian ship. The AA-9 was 390 meters or 1,279 feet long, or about 3.4 times the length of the Consular-class. Being 222 meters or 728 feet wide, it was about 10 AR-170s across, and at a height of 97 meters or 318 feet, it was the exact same height as a Zillo Beast. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be about 5.5 times the length of a Boeing 747, and about 3.5 times as wide, and around the same height as a 30-story building. For engines, it uses Type Dyne 2557 sublight drives, and was equipped with a Class 4 hyperdrive. That's slower than almost anything out there, being tied with the Death Star. So if you're looking for a quick trip across the galaxy, the AA-9 wouldn't be it. In atmosphere, it had a speed of 420 kilometers per hour, or 261 miles per hour. This makes it about half the speed of the Consular-class cruiser. But it could hold up to 30,000 passengers, and did have many accommodations, and was maintained by a team of droids, including COO cook droids. The AA-9 had provisions for up to 3 months of supplies, which would be especially handy during those long trips due to that slow hyperdrive. This freighter was known to have at least 3 decks, The upper deck contained the bridge, as well as a very large cargo area. We don't have official numbers here, but given that it could carry supplies for 30,000 people for 3 months, while having to carry the luggage of all those passengers, I think we're looking at a ship that can carry at least 4,000 dewbacks. For reference, the CR-90 is about half the length, and it can carry 3,000 metric tons of cargo, so 4,000 dewbacks may be a conservative estimate if anything. To load up into the ship, the AA-9 had several very large panels on the top deck that would open to accept cargo, but these could also work as boarding ramps for the passengers. The middle decks on most of these models would be used to store cargo and foodstuffs, but some would be modified to house more passengers. And we don't know for sure what was carried on that last deck, but it can be presumed that this was either where the crew stayed, or for times when they needed to carry extra cargo. The bow of this ship contains this large T-shape made out of transparent steel, which may have worked as a sort of observation area for the passengers. As for its history, the AA-9 would become very popular on Coruscant, being cheap, reliable, and able to transport a ton of passengers, perfect for the Ecumenopolis, and that's why it got the nickname the Coruscant Freighter. In the year 22 BBY, one named the Gendirian Valley was used by Anakin and Padme to travel to Naboo. Following the failed assassination attempt on Padme, they disguised themselves as refugees. Just moments later would be the opening of the Clone Wars, and that same year the refugee relief movement would begin converting these freighters into refugee transports, rescuing loyalists from separatist-owned worlds. Now that's all canon, but there's a lot more expanded upon in Legends. 6 months after the start of the Clone Wars, the AA-9 known as the Star of Isken was used to transport former Supreme Chancellor Valorum into political exile. However, an Anzat assassin hired by the Separatists, named Sajay Tasha, was on board the Isken as well. She would kill Valorum in the traditional Anzadi way of drinking his soup, allowing these tentacles to extend from her face and feed on Valorum. After this pre-flight meal, she was able to escape, but not before sabotaging the Isken. It would explode, killing everyone on board and leaving no evidence of the act she committed. And though many were killed on board, this flaming hulk of 390 meters of ship would come crashing into the cityscape, killing even more people on the way down. This shocking death of a former Supreme Chancellor caused public outrage, which led to the passing of new legislation called the Enhanced Security and Enforcement Act. Though controversial, it gave Supreme Chancellor Palpatine even more control over security on Coruscant. And as you might have guessed, Darth Sidious was behind this, as Valorum was one of the biggest detractors of emergency powers, an act that would be passed just a day after the Isken exploded. The AA-9 would not only see service in civilian use, but it would actually be used by the Republic for military purposes as well. In its military role, it was nicknamed the Gunship Transport and would be seen on numerous worlds. Here it could work as a smaller and cheaper alternative to the Acclamator and Venator, which were often used to transport goods to the warfront. And with its enormous 30,000 passenger capacity, it also made for a hell of a clone troop transport. That's 15 times the troops found on the Venator, and almost twice that of the Acclamator. Most of these gunship transports would be painted a dark brown color, differing from the gray norm of the Republic, but during the Battle of Alderaan a variant was painted white and blue, and was used alongside Acclamators. The only problem was that this thing remained unarmed, relying completely on starfighter defense. And now with some lucrative military contracts, this convinced Bodachev shipyards to start working on the SS-54 assault ship, a craft that would notably be used by the bounty hunter Sugi. Jango Fett would encounter an AA-9 on the planet Malastare, where it was being used by the force-sensitive cult the Bando Gora. They would use these to transfer drugs and slaves from a local crime lord named Zabalto, who ran an enormous death stick factory on Malastare. When Jango boarded one of these ships, he saw that all of the instrument panels and symbols were written in Huttese, and so he knew that the Hutts must have been helping the Bando Gora. After the Clone Wars, we don't hear much more of this ship, but it was used 20 years later in the Galactic Civil War, and in canon we have one last appearance of the AA-9. Just 4 years before the Battle of Yavin, rebels stationed on the planet Imver would discover an AA-9 and use it to flee from Imperial forces. So that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. Just wanted to point out that the Razor Crest used by the Mandalorian may have been built by the same company. It's similar in the engine placement and just overall look, and then you also got the fact that the Halo was used by another bounty hunter, so maybe there's a connection there. The AA-9 first appeared in Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. The gunship transport variant would first appear in the Clone Wars expansion to Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds, and the one for smuggling was in Star Wars Bounty Hunter. It's kind of funny to note, but the gunship transport in-game is considerably smaller than the AA-9 is on screen. This is most likely done to try and keep it in line with other units, like how we see the GR-75 being similar in length to the Sentinel-class landing craft, when really it's about 3 times as long. And a little note on the inconsistency of the story of the Star of Isken. When the Clone Wars TV show was running, the episode titled The Lost One depicted Chancellor Valorum as being alive, despite the comic The Star of Isken showing that he had died almost a year prior. This inconsistency was never explained by Lucasfilm, and the show is only off the hook now since the expanded universe was declared non-canon. Though a lot of stuff in canon doesn't directly contradict stuff in Legends, the fact that the Clone Wars TV show was kept canon, it definitely nullifies the Star of Isken incident. So that's it for the AA-9, the Coruscant freighter. But most important of all, remember, a space bus is no place to hit on royalty, and the Force will be with you. Always. The Grand Army of the Republic had the actual all-terrain armored transport. What's up, MetaNerdz? This video is all about the HAVW A6 Juggernaut, aka the Clone Turbo Tank. We will do a complete breakdown using things like a cross-sections and a tour of this vehicle via Battlefront 2, as well as get into its history, going from its time with the Republic, up through the Empire, and see how rebels and primitive tribes found ways to overcome this thing. And we'll close out with some behind-the-scenes facts, but let's start with the history. It was produced by Kuat Drive Yards, the same company that would create the Venators and Imperial Star Destroyers, as well as all the walkers we know, being produced either directly at the KDY orbital shipyards, or through their subsidiary Rathana Heavy Engineering. What the Republic paid for these was never declassified, but it is estimated to have cost around 350,000 credits. The cost of most other walkers is unknown, but that would be about 4.5 times the cost of the AAT, which is just a really great deal. Though we don't see them in the very beginning of the Clone Wars, they were definitely deployed by 21 BBY. Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka were leading an assault on Felucia when their forces were overwhelmed. Ahsoka, perhaps drunk off the awesomeness of riding atop a Juggernaut into battle, refuses to retreat and almost has to be physically pulled off the battlefront. As they escape via LAAT gunship, she looks down and watches her HAV-6 explode. There's some debate as to what exactly caused this vehicle to blow, since it wasn't hit by any explosives, no tanks, or even wrist rockets. It's stated that the plates that cover this vehicle are, quote, thermally superconducting armor that absorbs energy beams and spreads heat harmlessly over a wide area. With hundreds, if not thousands of droids firing on the Juggernaut at the same time, no matter how you spread it, it'll no longer be just a harmless amount of heat. The interior may have been cooking, and may have set off some of the Tabana gas and/or rocket stores that are located in this section, causing the cockpit to pop right off. Or the simple solution is that it was just scuttled, intentionally destroyed by the crew so that it wouldn't fall into the enemy's hands. But this whole evacuation happens very fast, so I don't know if there would have been enough time to set charges. Maybe it would have been as simple as throwing a grenade into the rocket pack on the way out, or that the Juggernauts all have a pre-programmed self-destruct command that could have been easily issued as they fled. I really feel like the way it was shot was supposed to demonstrate an overwhelming amount of small arms fire, but definitely let me know what you think down in the comments below. For me, the idea that on some battlefront there could have been hundreds of clones inside being cooked to death, if there was enough droids blasting it, is both interesting and terrifying. The following year would see another use of Juggernauts on Felucia, again being accompanied by ATTEs and Ahsoka. Then in the final year of the Clone Wars, they would be seen at the Republic Center for Military Operations. It's unclear if they are moving to a location for deployment, or to be serviced, or just on patrol so that the crew can get some hours behind the controls. And it is important to note that throughout the war, it is claimed that the CIS was stealing shipments of Juggernauts that left the KDY orbital facility. But we can find no visual confirmation of a CIS Juggernaut in use, so whether they were just kept to study weaknesses, or just a rumor, is unknown. But the most notable use would be during the Battle of Kashyyyk. Here there would be at least 9 Juggernauts deployed, and seemingly from just a single Venator. Their offensive abilities proved quite impressive, though really they could have just literally rolled over the invading CIS forces. So since this is the perfect place to take a closer look, let's head down to the sandy beaches of Kachiro with our cross-section in hand to see where everything was and how it all worked. We gotta start off with a relatively mundane aspect, cargo and fuel. You see, the Juggernaut was capable of hauling tons of supplies, or munitions, food, water, and Bacta for other clones and allies. It is unclear if this behemoth runs in a form of liquid gas, electricity, or just the same Tabana gas used for its laser cannons, but whatever it needs, it is pumped in through these hoses that draw from the Venator. Venators have one of the most versatile hangar sections in all of galactic history, so it could carry fuel for both starfighters and land vehicles, depending on the mission. The overall size was part of how it got its name, at a height of 30.4 meters or 100 feet, if you measure to the top of the observation post. That would be nearly 1.5 times the height of the AT-AT, but just the main body was about a Wookiee shorter. At 49.4 meters or 162 feet long, it was 2.5 times the length of the AT-AT, or about 5.5 AATs. The width is 19.6 meters or 64 feet, which is about 3 Wookiees wider than the AT-TE. And just to show you how ridiculous this vehicle is, let's do a comparison for just the wheels. Each was about 7.6 meters or 25 feet tall, making it taller than a snail tank and nearly twice the height of the AAT. And it was also about half as wide as the AAT, so it could easily run those things over. Now, if the Juggernaut ever landed here on Earth, the lookout would be about as tall as a 10-story building, it would be wider than 5 lanes of traffic, and longer than 3.5 school buses. But still nothing on the Bagger 923, which was more than 3 times as tall, and more than 4 times the length of the Juggernaut. This of course is an awesome size, but even better, it serves some very practical functions. It could carry up to 300 troops, while having enough provisions on board for 20 days, along with fuel for 30,000 kilometers. For reference, the diameter of Earth and Kashyyyk is only around 12,000 kilometers. It could also carry 30 tons of cargo, which is some of the crates that we see all around, and which is a weight equal to 37 dewbacks. Now, as we look around this interior, we can see that there are way less than 300 seats, meaning those were most likely reserved for higher ranking clones, and there would have been a lot of clones stuffed into these open areas. There are 8 gunners for the multiple weapons which we'll look at in a minute, and 12 pilots. That's a lot, but it's because there are 2 separate pilot crews, each located in a separate cockpit. You see, there is no true front of the clone turbo tank. Each cockpit has full control over the vehicle, and the drive and gears are built such that it is just as fast and maneuverable no matter which direction you're going in. That being said, let's be real folks, this is the main cockpit. It has the lights, forward-facing weaponry, and both lookout points view in this direction. Sorry clones in the back, nice trying to make up for your smaller cockpit. Now this one that we have to tour had its cockpit blown apart, but we can see how it would have looked, with the pilot up front here, followed by the navigator, and then a gunner. Commanding officers and Jedi could climb up into this opening to get a better view of the battlefront, while this spotter would be way up here. This was of course the most exposed position, leaving you vulnerable to all sorts of droid sniper fire, but it was considered worth the extra intel gained. He would get into position via these hatches on the roof, and these rungs would retract, allowing the telescopic pole to retract as well. This is a heavy laser cannon turret, followed by a rapid repeating heavy laser cannon over here. Each can rotate 360 degrees and be fired from inside of the Juggernaut, with a cool detail being that the gunner station displays a 3D holographic representation of the battlefront to each gunner. Up here is the communication dish and scanner, important for both acquiring hostiles nearby, but even picking up various encoded transmissions that might indicate an ambush being set up, or even a nearby, previously undetected CIS base. I do want to point out that perhaps these openings work like weapon hardpoints, allowing different things to be fitted into these slots, because with different Juggernauts we do see different weaponry on the roof. Like with Ahsoka's escapades on Felucia, there was this heavy blaster turret with a clone trooper dangerously exposed, instead of the gun that we see on Kashyyyk and in this cross-section. But there is even more firepower. A medium anti-personnel laser cannon extends out of the side here, with this tube in the center being its targeting sensor. And then there's this retractable munitions box on each side that can fire rockets or grenades. These boxes are not rockets, but instead headlights, which not only project visible light, but also wavelengths like infrared in order to provide additional data to the navigator. But this sort of jaw would open up to reveal twin anti-personnel blaster cannons. Now what most likely destroyed the cockpit of these Juggernauts was either the ridiculously powerful cannons of the MTT, one of which we can see right here, concentrated fire from AATs, or some precision bombing from hyenas. Why I don't think this is snails or spiders is because this scarring on the sides is said to be the worst that they can do to a Juggernaut. Now the guns, armor, and tech is usually the most badass part, but we gotta show some love for the amazing engineering that gets this thing moving. First off, let's actually appreciate how high off the ground this thing is, allowing troops to easily walk underneath, acting as protection from enemy air support and mortars. The drive shaft is said to run almost the full length of the undercarriage, with these enormous cylinders housing the steering pinions. Remember, it can drive the same forward or backwards, with steering taken over at either end. And each of the wheels is connected via its own independent suspension. Shock absorbers and the fact that it is 10 independent wheels rolling over the surface allows for the smoothest ride possible. And the wheels being so wide helps for a couple reasons. One is just that the incredible weight of the Juggernaut is now spread over the width of 10 points, instead of something like the AT-ST or AT-AT, which have all of their weight bearing down on a few small points. This made it less prone to sinking into soft or muddy terrain, though it should be noted that it was often paired up with ATTEs that could use its winch to free a stuck turbo tank. Sometimes it would get high-centered by rolling over a rock that lifted the wheels off the ground, but the ATTE was strong enough to pull it free with its winch. That being said, it was a beast on nearly all terrain, due to the fact that each wheel was actually comprised of 3 independent spinning segments. Then look at all the grooves on these sections, and you can see that really they were controlling 30 independently spinning wheels, with the same power forward and reverse, allowing them to tear up any terrain they wanted. And it also must be one of the most difficult vehicles to learn to pilot. On top of that, the clone turbo tank was no misnomer, as its top speed was 160 km per hour or 99 miles per hour, meaning this enormous machine tore across the battlefront at nearly 3 times the speed of the AAT and ATTE. Both its speed and power were on great display during the Battle of Kashyyyk, where it helped the Republic and Wookiees secure a victory over the CIS invaders. And unlike many Republic creations, it was not decommissioned or destroyed by the Empire. In fact, there was even a successor made called the HCVW-A9 turbo tank that was used to transport prisoners around the Wobani labor camp, where we saw Jyn Erso get rescued. Many of the A6s left over went to Outer Rim worlds, where they encountered opposition by rebels and primitive native populations. Ahakista had a segment of the population that was set on keeping Imperials off their world, and to stop the Juggernauts, they came up with the idea of zone runners. This was an incredibly dangerous role, where they would run right up to the tank and throw a high explosive satchel right onto the pinion. This wasn't enough to destroy the whole beast, but it would prevent or greatly hinder the Juggernaut's ability to steer. Then on the planet Meridun, we see how the primitive Amani species were able to best the HAV-6. The Imperials had backed up against a cliffside to set up a base, knowing that the Amani can launch attacks from the dense jungles and tall grass. But the natives scaled the mountain and rained down on top of the lookout tower, killing the trooper and presumably throwing explosives inside of the tank via the hatches on the roof. With the press of a button, they detonated the charges, causing a chain reaction that blew apart the Juggernaut from the inside. Overwhelmed and forced into the grass, Amani swarmed up the sides of the beast and fired into the cockpit with stolen Imperial blasters. A true display of how tactics and creativity can beat any machinery. Later, they would be used during the Imperial attack on Hoth, and even after the Empire fell, they would be used as late as 13 ABY by Imperial remnant forces like the Restored Empire. So that's it for its history, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. There was a predecessor called the A5, which was based on concept art for Episode 5. The expanded universe used this in some books and comics, but it was only about half the size of the Juggernaut that we eventually saw in Episode 3, so that one got called the A6. Apparently the A5 had some terrible maintenance issues, combined with even worse service by the Republic and Empire. An excerpt from the log of an Imperial machinist on Dathomir reads, Day 17. Forward drive shaft on Juggernaut 11 has snapped. Requesting replacement drive shaft. Day 22. Resubmitting request for replacement drive shaft. Day 38. Drive shaft still has not arrived. Please advise. Day 50. Awaiting drive shaft. Day 123. Awaiting drive shaft. And then Imperial turned Rebel Krixmadine said that this was true for the A6 Juggernaut as well. Now there's a really funny reason for the name Clone Turbo Tank. This is so Hasbro could produce toys of this thing, but the problem was that Toy Biz owned the rights to make a toy called a Juggernaut, secured for making the Marvel character. This is so silly because it's not even a rival character, just a vehicle, and Juggernaut is a word, not just an X-Men character's name. But alas, that's why we got Clone Turbo Tank. Hasbro would later get this Marvel character's name's rights, but they kept their new name for the toy, and you see it on different stuff like the LEGO iterations as well. Now there are a ton of references and appearances of this thing, with that cross-section coming from the Episode 3 cross-sections, and it's also in the complete cross-sections. So here are the sources, split into canon and legends, and if you want to pick up your own copy of those, please check out our links in the description. But most important of all, remember, the Juggernaut and ATTE are the only true all-terrain armored transports, and the Force will be with you, always. When the fringes of your galactic empire get out of hand, send in your mini Venator. What's up, MetaNerdz? This video is about the Gladiator-class Star Destroyer. We'll do a complete breakdown and behind-the-scenes stuff, but let's start with its history. Initially, it was designed by Rendili Star Drive, the creators of things like the Dreadnought-class heavy cruiser and the Hammerhead-class cruiser during the Old Republic era. The design came from Wallach Blissix, who would work for both Rendili and Kuat drive yards. The Victor Initiative project was a joint venture between these two titans in the shipwright industry. They were tasked with improving the capital ships that were being used since the outset of the Clone Wars, like the Venator and the Acclamator. Trying to improve on the Venator sounds like the definition of an impossible task, and we can debate whether they were successful, but this project produced the Victory-class Star Destroyer. It would only be out for the last few months of the war, but it was envisioned that this Victory fleet would be aided by the Gladiator-class Star Destroyer. You see, the Venator was incredible in that it had plenty of firepower in its turbolasers, point defense cannons, and proton torpedoes, but its enormous and efficient hangar is what really made it so great. It could carry either 192 V-Wings or V-19s, along with 36 ARC-170s, and 192 Eta-2 interceptors, and then 30 LAAT gunships thrown in on top of that. The Victory could only carry 24 starfighters. Some of its space was used to carry an unknown amount of dropships and AT-AT walkers, but that's true for many other capital ships as well. So with this dramatic decrease in ship complement from the Venator to the Victory, they solved this problem by having a dedicated ship act as a large hangar. Now the official stats say that only 26 starfighters were aboard the Gladiator-class, but I feel like that is just one of those stats that was created without a lot of thought put into it, so don't worry, we can figure out a much more accurate number. Let's start with its overall size. At 600 meters or 1,969 feet long, it was about half the size of the Venator, 2/3 the Victory, and about 38% the length of the Imperial-class Star Destroyers. With a height of 126 meters or 413 feet, it was about half the height of the Venator and about a quarter the ISD. Being 329 meters or 1,079 feet wide, it was more than half the Venator and about 1/3 the ISD. If it ever showed up here on Earth, it would be about 2.5 Yamatos long, still the longest warship ever made, stand taller than the Statue of Liberty, and be about twice as wide as Michigan Stadium, which has the largest capacity of any American football stadium at 107,000. So if we take accounts that the Gladiator was essentially a massive flying hangar, with these two hangar exits on the side and the main one up front here, then we can calculate this section as being the hangar. You get 130 meters wide by 217 meters long, equaling 28,210 square meters. A single TIE fighter takes up about 64 square meters, but let's double that to provide enough room to walk around it, and or the room for the machinery if it's being held on racks. Doubled, it is 128 meters, so 28,210 divided by 128 is 220. We didn't include this space on the sides, or consider the fact that the TIE fighter racks are an excellent use of space, freeing up your hangar floor to be used for even more ships. I think this 220 number is actually conservative. It makes a lot more sense if you consider why it was created. Or, just by looking at it. Only 26 fighters seems ridiculously low. I don't say that the Victory starfighter complement was too low, only because it wasn't intended for that role. If we look at the cross-section for an Imperial 1 class Star Destroyer, you can see that only a relatively small section was dedicated to fighters. The ISD was almost 3 times the size of the Gladiator, and only had 72 TIEs, usually split up into 48 TIE fighters, 12 TIE bombers, and 12 TIE interceptors. Remember, the Empire was moving towards specialization, having specific craft carry out specific roles. You can see the ISD as being the most broad in its abilities, but if you think about it, it still had a very specific role as acting as a flying Imperial city. A sort of mobile Imperial castle that you could plop down where you want, with all your citizens behind the Durasteel wall that made up its hull. There were enough supplies and living quarters inside to wage a long war, and enough defensive measures to protect your command staff located inside. All of this allowing you to lord over the lands within their star system. The Victory would do the same, just on a smaller scale, but for both Star Destroyers, the bulk of their fighter complement came from other ships like the Gladiator, that was essentially a flying hangar, while things like extra firepower came from the Broadside class, which was essentially a flying pack of missiles. That being said, the Gladiator still packed enough weaponry to fend for itself, with 12 light dual turbo laser turrets, 10 point defense medium laser cannon turrets, and an impressive 10 torpedo or missile tubes, with a total payload of 300 missiles. So you can see that it lacks the ion cannons and heavy turbo lasers that you would want to break a shield and start ripping an enemy apart. But the theory is that if it was separated from a Victory or ISD, its starfighters could single out the shield generator, and those 300 missiles could finish him off. The problem for the Gladiator was that the Clone Wars came to an end just as it was being produced, and they were no longer up against a seemingly endless swarm of droid starfighters. It was more hit-and-run rebel tactics, and the Tarkin Doctrine said that the best way to stop this was through fear. hence the plopping down of intimidating castle-like Imperial Star Destroyers that housed a whole bureaucracy that could rule over rebellious planets, and enough turbolasers for a planetary bombardment if need be. So Kuat Drive Yards reworked the newer generation of Gladiators to also carry a large complement of troops, 2 battalions of stormtroopers, 1,200 total to be exact. When the Empire got word of some annoying new pirate gang, or a small planet flirting with rebellion, this reworked Gladiator would often be sent in on its own in order to lay down the law. Its firepower, fighter complement, and elite troops were often more than enough for smaller threats, and was much more cost efficient than always sending the big ISD. If they needed a hand, the Empire would often pair them up with 2 Raider 1 class corvettes, like seen with the rowdy Outer Rim planet Zorn. This strategy worked for decades, until the Rebel fleet started to grow. While Explicics, the renowned shipwright that designed the Gladiator and so many others, would betray the Empire and help the Rebels modify their new ships. Things like the Assault Frigate Mark II would be modified from the Dreadnought class, while other ships like the Nebulon-B were just stolen. Traitorous governments allowed CR-90s and other Corellian-made craft to fall into the hands of rebels, and when the fish folk of Mon Cala got involved, it became just too dangerous for smaller capital ships like the Gladiator to be without an Imperial Star Destroyer escort. When the Rebel Alliance attacked Camino and won BBY, there was at least 1 Gladiator involved in this epic space battle alongside ISDs. For the remainder of the Galactic Civil War, the Gladiator wasn't heard of much, but I would assume that they were stationed at various crucial assets across the galaxy, where they could rapidly deploy starfighter and stormtrooper support. It is likely that many Imperial drill pod boarding craft and TIE boarding shuttles would be worked into its complement, and hopefully those stormtroopers would be able to take over Rebel capital ships from within, all while the ISDs were being scrambled. So that's it for its history, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. I didn't include this part in its history because it would hurt the flow and, frankly, the cool factor, but this ship originally comes from the 1985 Droids TV show. There we see the Demolisher, a Gladiator that was stolen by none other than Kylo Ren back in 15 BBY. It's said that this could fetch 34 million credits on the black market. Whether that is cheaper than the Imperial price because of how hot it is, or a markup because of how rare it is unknown. Also, if you were wondering, speed stats are unknown, but it does come equipped with a Class 1 hyperdrive, making it as fast in the hyper as most quick little starfighters. The ship breakdown details come from the complete Star Wars Encyclopedia, and the Force Unleashed campaign guide, as well as the Essential Guide to Warfare. But most important of all, remember, you really haven't seen the last of Kylo Ren. And the Force will be with you, always. What's up, MetaNerdz? This video is all about the Bantha-class assault shuttle used by the New Republic. Despite being named for the lumbering beast on the sand planet of Tatooine, it was designed by engineers on the watery world of Mon Cala. Manufacturing happened on the Mon Calamari shipyards in this massive orbital ring, and over on the planet Sullust via Sorosub Corporation. It was classified as a heavy transport, having thick armor, shielding, and even a hyperdrive to insert troops and extract assets without needing the use of a capital ship. You can see that Mon Cala style in the engines and bridge design, and by looking at the main body of the Bantha, you can see how it was streamlined for a very specific role. This is essentially one massive room that would house hundreds of New Republic troops, along with several light assault craft like speeders or even smaller armored vehicles. To clear up the LZ, this assault shuttle lived up to its name with a pair of quad turbolaser cannons, so a total of 8 individual turbolaser strength bolts that were equal in power to those found in capital ships. Those would blow apart any defenses or vehicles set up around cities or forts, while even being powerful enough to override most shields with a couple of volleys. This also means that it could punch a hole in the side of Imperial Star Destroyers, allowing the NR commandos to raid just about any target they wished. When landing, this large footpad would stabilize the ship and position these 3 forward-facing hatches near the surface. And it also had these landing thrusters that would help control descent. Commandos would often just jump right out, though this middle hatch did have a ramp that would extend, something that would be necessary when loading up raided cargo or vehicles. If you look on the sides and rear, we can see these relatively large panels that would most likely house shield projectors and work as stabilizers in atmosphere. You definitely don't want to lose control of an expensive transport carrying hundreds of your best trained commandos. As for the purpose of these large booms extending from the hull, that is a bit of a mystery. They may also house some deflector shield projectors, but though they would be awesome as a pair of massive cannons, maybe ion cannons to open them up to those turbolasers, there really isn't any evidence for this. This one panel does make it look like these are cannons of some sort, but most depictions just show them as lights. I think most likely it just housed some of the tech required to run the hyperdrive, shielding, and pair of quad turbo lasers that would eat through power and Tabana gas. If we compare its height, it seems to be about 16 meters or 52 feet tall, making it more than half the height of the AT-AT and more than twice the height of the Millennium Falcon. At 24 meters or 79 feet wide, it was a baby Jawa wider than the YT-1300. And at 32 meters or 105 feet long, it was just a bit shorter than the 1300, but nearly 3 huts longer than the U-Wing. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be about as tall as a 5-story building, wider than 9 school buses, and longer than 2 V-22 Ospreys. As for this ship's history, it took the fight to the Imperial Remnant on Oridin during the Battle of Brental IV in the year 4 ABY. It was designed as a counter to the Empire's military transport, the Sentinel-class, but I'd say this Mon Cala design blows it out of the water. Later, during the evacuation of Kirtrik, Bantha-class transports played a crucial role in saving both civilians and NR forces. Here, the strength of that Bantha hide-inspired hull armor was on full display, as some of them took direct hits from the powerful AT-AT walkers. So that's it for its history, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. It was first introduced in the comic X-Wing Rogue Squadron 21, but expanded upon in Handbook 1 X-Wing Rogue Squadron and the New Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels. It also gets a mention in the Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia. Let me know what you guys think about this ship design, and if you hope to see it in new Star Wars media like a movie or something like The Mandalorian. But most important of all, remember, if you're in the Imperial Remnant, beware the flying Banthas, and the Force will be with you, always. Believe it or not, this ship was a symbol of Imperial security before the Rebel scum started using it so effectively. What's up, MetaNerds? This video is all about the EF-76 Nebulon-B escort frigate. We will get into its history and behind-the-scenes facts, but let's start with a breakdown. And keep an eye out for this Legends tag if you care about that distinction. It was manufactured by Kuat Drive Yards soon after the Imperial transition, and each one would cost the Empire 8.5 million credits. That's more than twice the cost of the Arquitens-class light cruiser, and about 1/18th the Imperial 1-class Star Destroyer. They were built to escort cargo shipments across the galaxy, and thus were equipped with a Class 2 hyperdrive, and one of the most reliable long-range communications arrays available. This way they could call for backup when ambushed by rebels or pirates, but it could also hold its own in a fight. The exterior is lined in an equal split of anti-capital ship and anti-starfighter weaponry, with 12 turbolasers and 12 laser cannons. It also had dual tractor beam emitters for rescuing damaged allies, or disrupting the enemy's formations. And there was also a torpedo missile launcher variant. But it also contained hangar bays that could be filled with a combination of TIE fighters and shuttles, or just a max of 2 squadrons of TIE fighters. That would be a total of 24 TIEs. The deflector shield was located in this section, protecting the relatively weak connecting section and the engine array. Although it looks similar to the Imperial Command Bridge style, the actual bridge is located up here, more securely tucked away and surrounded by other similar looking structures. Its 7-ion engine array got it up to a top atmospheric speed of 1200 km per hour or 746 miles per hour, making it as fast as a TIE fighter and much faster than an ISD. But it also has a megalite rating, or how fast it can go in space, of only 40 compared to 60 with the Star Destroyer and 100 in the TIE fighter. Have fun trying to make sense of how it can be faster than a TIE fighter in atmosphere, but slower than it in empty space. I'll see you down in the comments. You can see the large antennas that it utilized for long-range and short-range communication, and there are numerous docking tubes on this ship. Each could accommodate things from freighters to starfighters, and there are also multiple hangar bays on this section. One of its most unique design features were these triangular panels, which operated as static discharge vanes. That's important when constantly traveling in and out of planetary atmospheres, dust-filled asteroid belts, all while docking with numerous ships. As for its overall size, it was 300 meters or 984 feet long, making it less than 1/5 an ISD and about 2 X-Wings shorter than the Arquitens-class. Its width of 72 meters or 236 feet was 1/14th that of the ISD, or about 3 times the Millennium Falcon. At a height of 166 meters or 545 feet, it was about a third of the ISD and only a tall Wookiee above the requisite class light destroyer. If it was here on Earth, it would be about 3 football fields long, wider than 27 school buses, and nearly twice the height of the Statue of Liberty. Now as for its history, it was used in a wide variety of roles throughout the decades. It was produced shortly after the declaration of a new order, and would start off just guarding shipments. But these front pods could be tweaked endlessly. Some variants had them carry heavy ordnance and were used as a bomber. Some kept the starfighter complement at its highest and focused on search and destroy anti-starfighter roles, while others were search and rescue ships, leaving the hangars empty and guiding stranded vessels to safety with its tractor beams. But as early as 14 BBY, just 5 years after the Clone Wars, rebels set their eyes on acquiring them. The first was Birch Teller and his cell, who attacked an escort moving the hyperdrive for the Death Star. By 2 BBY, we see that at least 5 were captured, showing up when Mon Mothma gave a rallying speech about her resigning from the Senate to lead a rebellion. The rebels learned to fill these front pods with medical droids and other life-saving equipment, turning them into large medical frigates. Med Bay is right up front here, and in Legends there are 745 beds versus 700 in canon. This is similar to that of the Medstar-class frigate used during the Clone Wars, a vessel that was a predecessor to the Nebulon-B. But keep in mind that the 700-bed Med Bay is more than twice that of the commonly used Pelta-class medical frigate also used during the war. Later in the year 2 BBY, 3 of them were under General Jan Dodonna's command when Grand Admiral Thrawn attacked Atollon. The Battle of Atollon would result in the loss of each of these Nebulon-Bs, showing that their deflector shields were no match for a turbolaser bombardment from an Imperial Star Destroyer. Dodonna only narrowly survived by utilizing the escape pods. Over the next 2 years, at least one more Nebulon-B was added to the rebel fleets, because during the attack on Scarif, Admiral Raddus was now in command of 3 Nebulon-Bs. One did escape, but the other 2 were destroyed during the battle when Darth Vader's ISD, the Devastator, unleashed a full barrage of turbolaser fire. Admiral Raddus was killed that day, but Dodonna survived on to see the Battle of Yavin. After the Death Star's destruction, the rebels quickly evacuated Yavin and now maintained a mobile base, keeping the fleet constantly on the move. During this time, a Nebulon-B served as the rebel headquarters, with Mon Mothma, Dodonna, and Akbar on board. From here, Han and Luke would go off on various missions, while Leia mostly focused on finding a new base of operations. They settled on Hoth, but when that was destroyed, they moved back to just staying in a mobile fleet up through the Battle of Endor. The Redemption was the vessel that treated Luke after his injuries on Cloud City. This Nebulon-B would also be present during the attack on the Death Star too. 2 of them were present, but it's unclear if both survived. At least one of them made it to Muster Point Virgins, the meetup for Rebel Fleet Command 20 days after the Battle of Endor. The Rebels were now known as the New Republic, and one of the first places they raided was Kuat Drive Yards, the manufacturers of everything from ISDs to Nebulon-Bs. Now they had several of these frigates, and many took part in the Battle of Jakku. One would be remembered as one of the most badass Nebulons in history, as it continued to fire all of its weapons into a Star Destroyer, even after being cut in half by turbolaser fire. Another decided that it had to crash into Admiral Garrick Versio's flagship, the Eviscerator. This would prove the final blow to an already damaged destroyer. Decades later, some Nebulon-Bs were still in service across the galaxy, with them being a staple in the Jinta security forces. Protecting the Jinta system and supporting the First Order, they were attacked by Iden Versio and her daughter. They were able to eliminate the fighter escort and disable the Nebulon-B's engines. In Legends, Kuat Drive Yards produced a successor to the Nebulon-B known as the Corona-class frigate. These were sold exclusively to the New Republic, but were not a part of the modernization program, and thus not that many of them were produced. Some Nebulon-Bs continued to serve the Corellian Defense Force, and one would make up a part of the Secret Retreat as late as 137 ABY. In canon, it gets replaced by the Nebulon-C, similar in appearance but upped everything from the engines, armament, and nearly doubled the overall size. But turbolaser barrages were still the bane of this thing's existence. So that's it for its history, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. The Nebulon-B first appeared in Empire Strikes Back, and was designed by Nilo Rodio Hamero, who said he took inspiration from an outboard motor. There's a funny story referencing how many Nebulon-Bs were stolen, where during the Battle of Uvo 4, one Imperial admiral shouted in annoyance that maybe for once they could destroy a rebel ship that wasn't already paid for by the Imperials. The reason why this ship was chosen as the HQ and the rebels were in between permanent bases was because the sensor arrays were one of the best available. It being designed for transporting Imperial cargo, its long-range communication devices were some of the easiest to conceal and encrypt. And there is a small difference in the Legends and canon numbers on the crew. Legends has it at 854, 66 of which are gunners, with a minimum crew of 307. Canon simply has the total number at 850. It is a bit ironic that it was designed so that rebels and pirates couldn't find it, but that worked both ways once these ships were actually stolen. And one of the most famous depictions of a Nebulon-B is in the Force Unleashed series. The Salvation was named by Mon Mothma and was commanded by Juno Eclipse, a former Imperial commander in charge of a former Imperial ship. During the assault on Kamino, it was sacrificed by sending it careening into Tamira City, destroying its shield generator and some of its cloning facilities. The reason why I didn't include the Salvation in the breakdown or history is because there are a lot of discrepancies that only happen on this ship. We can easily just say they're all upgrades, but critics point out that the amount of hangars, the increase in size overall, but also in those hangars and the bridge, are only seen with this Nebulon-B's depiction, but nowhere else. Of course, it is badass nonetheless, and I kinda love how it's depicted. Just write it off as a variant. A lot of the breakdown info comes from guidebooks like the Encyclopedia of Starfighters, Ultimate Star Wars, the Rebel Files, and the Last Jedi cross-sections, and Legends details come from the Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels, Rebel Alliance sourcebooks, and the Essential Guide to Warfare. Honestly, if you're thinking about picking them up, the Legends books here are a lot better, but of course they may differ from the new canon depictions. So that's it for the Nebulon-B. But most important of all, remember, invest all your money in Kuat Drive Yard stock, and the Force will be with you, always. What's up, MetaNerdz? This video is all about a fan ship that would serve a very important role in the Imperial Navy. It was crafted by unusual suspects, and the lore was expanded on by Slingblade87 over on DeviantArt, so be sure to check out all the related links down in the description. But let's break down this massive battle station. Conceived by Admiral Tyon, who saw the need for a mobile space station that could act as both a command post and resupply ship. Seeing this station makes you really appreciate how massive an Imperial Star Destroyer is, as these ships would often act as a command base when policing remote worlds. Your ISD looms in the atmosphere, sending mobile bases to be established on world, and tons of shuttles and TIE fighters that control the airspace in cities. This Tyon-class Imperial battle station just scaled this up, acting as the central hub for the ISDs, and sending multiple Star Destroyers out to police entire sectors. I use the word police, but remember that when Palpatine took over, half the galaxy hated the centralized authority of the Republic, and thus the new Empire, so this was more a way to act as an Imperial anchor, dropping it in systems that still saw themselves as Confederates. But let's take a look inside of this ship to see how it all worked. First off, let's look at the size. It was 19.6 kilometers or 12 miles across, making the Death Star 1 about 8 times wider. This would make it 1/10 the width of the Death Star 2, and 1/34th that of Starkiller Base. But if we're talking volume, it's about 1,000 times smaller than the DS2. To compare it to Earth, the Tyon was nearly as long as Manhattan, and could almost stretch across the Strait of Gibraltar. Now back inside of this battle station, you can see these enormous elevators that connected each of these platforms, moving the munitions, hypermatter fuel, Tabana gas, foods, and liquids, as well as all the other materials needed to run Star Destroyers, that each had thousands of crew members. This central column would also house the shielding technology, along with its hyperdrive, which was rated as a Class 3. That's not the fastest, but it is really impressive for a battle station of this size. Its most notable feature is the docking areas, which could house either 18 Star Destroyers or 36 smaller vessels like cruisers, freighters, or corvettes. There are these 6 larger dock openings which would double stack Star Destroyers and could accommodate ships up to the size of Allegiance-class battlecruisers, a 2,200 meter long ship. Then there were these 6 smaller openings that could take up to a Procusator-class, a 1,200 meter vessel. There is a ring of hangars on the top and bottom, making 12 hangars in total, and this area would house things like Gazantes and other shuttles that could bring countless TIE fighters and AT variants into the battlefront. Now the battle station itself was also well defended, with over 1,000 turbolasers, more than 700 laser cannons and ion cannons, 320 missile turrets, and 360 tractor beams. This meant that although destroying a fully packed Tyon with 18 Star Destroyers would make for a tremendous Rebel victory, it wasn't very likely. Thrawn may have loved this method of power distribution across the galaxy, but Admiral Tyon grew frustrated as this idea was passed over in favor of intimidating massive single ships like the Assertor, Vengeance, Executor, and of course the Death Stars. In fact, all Tyon production stops around the time the Death Star 1 is nearly completed, but they were never dismantled and served the Empire years after the death of Sidious. Some would continue into the time of the Imperial Remnant, but they did become too difficult to maintain. After all, something has to eventually supply the supply ship, and so the warlords left to rule their fragments of the Empire mostly found it better to command their fleets from their Star Destroyers. So that's it for the Tyon-class Imperial battle station. I highly suggest checking out those DeviantArt links to see all the other amazing Star Wars fan creations. I definitely like the idea behind this battle station, and I feel like it could easily fit into Star Wars material. But what do you guys think of the Tyon? Is it necessary, awesome, silly, or anything in between? Let me know what you guys think and how you would use it in the comments down below. But most important of all, remember, always ask yourself, what would Thrawn do? And the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerdz? This breakdown will show just how unique and important the Eta-class transport barge was to the Imperial war machine. This has been around since the year 2000 in Star Wars Force Commander and brought into new canon via Star Wars Commander, but the best renders come from Fractal Sponge. Check out the links to see even more high-quality images. It is essentially a smaller version of the Y85 Titan dropship, which is of the notable Y-series dropships including the Y45 hauler. They map on pretty well to cheaper cost and simpler design while carrying less stuff, with the Theta right in the middle, as they could all carry not just walkers, but a wide array of materials and vehicles. There are no official stats for its size, but with this shot we see that it's about a Wookiee taller than an AT-AT, so around 25 meters or 82 feet. It has a width of 20 meters or 66 feet. We can see that the AT-AT is a tight fit, at only around 9 meters wide, which really shows just how much electrical, armor, and generators fill the walls here. And a length of 47.5 meters or 156 feet makes it about 3 dewbacks longer than a Jawa sandcrawler. To see the difference, the Y85 Titan has 2 AT-ATs across with plenty of servicing and all these walkable areas on the sides and in between, and this is mirrored at the back, so way more than just 4 times the volume. The most overlooked feature are these floors. They could collapse down flat if it's just carrying one enormous walker, but the height allows it to put any combo of smaller speeders, shuttles, and tanks on these racks. At the rear are a pair of medium or maybe even heavy dual laser turrets, which would be better for blowing down defenses and other vehicles, while low at the front were a pair of dual light laser ball turrets for an anti-personnel role. Each side has these long cooling exhaust circular structures, with these main exhaust tubes at the rear likely leaving a nice little mini river out the back when deployed on Tatooine, or constantly being filled with frogs and slimy slithering creatures when stationed in the deep jungles. It would have a massive power generator smartly located at the rear, with all of this storing the reactor itself and Tabana gas stores, powering everything from air conditioning to weaponry, with repulsors of the kind only seen in the other Y-series or MTT. It's often said that the heat generated from these repulsors under the MTT would kill someone, but that doesn't hold up in all depictions of it. Let's just say if it doesn't kill you instantly, the long-term effects of hanging out under a repulsor beam generator sauna can't be good for your mitochondria. And so how it works is all these blue lights at the rear are part of the repulsors that actually move it forward, while there's this whole array on the bottom that keeps it off the ground. And there's no official speed, but it's likely at around 30 kilometers per hour or 19 miles per hour, putting it around that of the Sandcrawler and MTT. The windows for the bridge blend the look of the Jawa Sandcrawler with the triangular Imperial bridge design. Eta-class barges were commonly employed to transport newly manufactured vehicles from factories to nearby landing pads for deployment, like the 2M hover tanks, MTV-7 light vehicles, and various speeder bikes and walkers. Due to the barge's limited capacity, walkers had to be stowed with their legs folded, making it so they weren't ready for immediate combat. And there was some non-negligible time for them to extend their legs and prepare for battle after being unloaded, precious times that the enemy could take advantage of. Several of them could be launched from capital ships like the ISD, and this would be a rare case of the Empire not putting all its eggs in one basket, as we see 4 of these Thetas deploying, but you could deliver just as many walkers from a single Y85. That's usually the Imperial MO, from everything from capital ships to Death Stars. They try and pack as many things into one vessel as possible. But of course the advantage with the Theta is that if one gets shot down, you don't lose 4 walkers and all that extra personnel. Of course that means there's more maintenance across 4 different ships, and I'm sure fuel efficiency scales with the larger transports, though the Theta does give you tactical advantages too, being able to pick out 4 different landing zones to deliver various vehicles or munitions instead of one impossible to miss transport ship landing in a single place. One of the Rebels' advantages was always that they could focus their assets on a single key area, and this often worked on defense as well, since the Imps usually packed a ton of things into a single ship, be that cargo, starfighters, or other vehicles. The Empire had to defend an entire galaxy, while the rebels can overwhelm a single target. But this does bring us to the issue of the Gazanti being able to carry 2 AT-ATs at a time, while itself only being 42 meters long, possibly being quicker, though the Gazanti is uniquely slow, but it's definitely more heavily protected, with 4 retractable heavy laser cannons, 2 retractable quad laser cannon turrets, and proton torpedo launchers. It raises the question of why you would ever need the Theta. The Gazanti is shorter, maybe quicker, and more powerful, and it can carry 2 walkers at once. Well, the only thing is that as we're seeing it, it cannot carry a bunch of vehicles stacked like the Theta. But all that does is make me think, why didn't they just make a Theta-type cargo container? A specialized system with a lowering rack mechanism that could attach to the Gazanti, and then you could do the same thing. Doubled without needing to make a whole new line of ships. Comment if you can think of anything else, but honestly what makes the most sense is out of universe. You'll see in comments on the page for this via Fractal Sponge that there's a comment explaining the issue of the Y85 Titan being too big to fit into the hangar of the ISD. I've seen similar ideas in comments all over the place. I'm not sure if I'm missing something, but the CR90 fits snug at 150 meters, and the Y85 Titan is definitely shorter. This is such a popular claim online that I didn't check into it. It's a statement that just floats around and everybody takes for granted. I even said it in the Titan video. Measuring an estimated 75 meters long and 35 meters wide, it was so large it could not fit aboard the hangars of Imperial-class Star Destroyers, even when in that same video I estimated it at exactly half the CR90, being 75 meters, so 2 of them could fit in this space, held in place via clamps like these. Of course, we only see this one clamp with the CR90, but it would make sense to have a ton of different ones to hold a wide array of things in place. So 2 Titans, or at least 4 of these Thetas or Gazantis. So still, the clear winner is the Gazanti, but out of universe, it's just because of this addition from the Rebels TV show. Now, the commenter was saying that the Theta was made just to solve the issue of the Titan not fitting in the ISD. It was first mentioned in Darksaber from 1995, and this image we get of how big it was comes from Inside the Worlds of Star Wars trilogy from 2004. So sadly, it might make more sense to just ignore the Gazanti carrying AT-ATs as just later canon additions that don't fit well with the logic of these earlier transports. It's just that these keep the walkers behind the thick hull armor of the Theta and Titan. In summary, if you want to see these 3 as options, because it is kinda cool watching the Gazantis drop off the walkers, then it is a testament to the Theta and Titan being nearly indestructible, like little armored boxes that ensure the delivery of those large, expensive, and crucial walkers, tanks, etc., safely shuttling them down to the battlefield, even in the thickest of flak and rebel fire. Meaning the Gazantis might be good for moving things around secured locations, but when planning an invasion or in the middle of battle, the Empire would have this option to go with the heavily armored transports. For their armored transports. What do you think? Comment down below. Please hit that like button if you appreciate lore over drama. Subscribe to see more. I have the Gazanti video coming soon. But most important of all, remember, every ship has a role to fill, and the Force will be with you. Always. When you're looking to deploy all-terrain armored transports en masse to crush rebel resistance, look no further than the massive Y85 Titan dropship. What's up, MetaNerdz? Today we'll be breaking down the Incom Y85 Titan, exploring its stats, capabilities, and role in Imperial forces throughout the Galactic Civil War era and beyond. Using both canon and legend sources, we'll construct a full picture of this craft and learn about its essential role in the Imperial war machine. The Imp's deployment of massive war machines such as the all-terrain armored transport and its myriad variants required an equally massive transport dropship to shuttle these armored behemoths from orbit to planetside. The Incom Y85 Titan filled this role, measuring an estimated 75 meters long and 35 meters wide. It was so large it could not fit aboard the hangars of Imperial-class Star Destroyers. It was rather transported in the cavernous berths of Dreadnought-class vessels such as the Executor-class Super Star Destroyers. This chunky dropship made full use of its incredible internal space, however, able to simultaneously transport 4 AT-ATs in addition to 4 AT-ST Scout Walkers, or sections of the prefabricated garrisons that Imperial forces favored so much as outposts or forward operating bases. The AT-ATs were stored 2 forward and 2 to the rear, above the enormous repulsor units required to keep the Titan afloat. Each of the 2 AT-AT bays were serviced by cranes and gantries, allowing personnel to board the walkers en route, and for mechanics and technicians to perform maintenance and basic repairs. A rotating rack carrying the Titan's quartets of AT-STs divided the 2 bays, allowing servicing by multiple angles. The armored, sloping frontal edge of the Titan served as an ablative shield to burn off heat when entering planetary atmospheres at high speeds, and terminated at the rooftop, double-decker command module. This cockpit space was roomy enough for dozens of personnel, with additional quarters below and behind the main command unit. The rear deck of the Titan, like the Separatists' multi-troop transport, was covered with exhaust vents to redirect the enormous heat signatures generated by such large repulsor units. In battle, Titans would be escorted by TIE fighters and dropped into zones with minimal resistance in order to safeguard their valuable cargo. But as a last resort, the Titan was armed with 2 twin heavy laser cannons, which is an enormous armament, an order of magnitude larger than the AT-AT's main guns. Again, much like the MTT, these guns were semi-fixed and locked in the forward position, indicating that their use is more for destruction of buildings, fortifications, and terrain features than nimble enemy fighters or vehicles. With its all-around ablative shielding, the Titan resembled more a flying bunker than a dropship, with even the command module's screen protected by thick, armored shutters. While shooting a Titan out of the sky along with their payload would be a prime objective for Rebel commanders, this was easier said than done. That thick armor provided considerable protection, and when deployed for a combat drop, Titans would move from the hangars of their SSD parent ship through the escorting armada to a drop point above the planet, most likely shepherded by swarms of escorting TIEs. From here, their drop zone would be calculated, probe droids and orbital scanning confirming the terrain stability of the landing zone, while bombers and orbital strikes softened up defenses. When ready, the Titans would plunge into the atmosphere, their ablative armor glowing white-hot as they plummeted. Their rapid descent would minimize their time under enemy guns, the repulsors only engaging in time to slow the behemoths to a survivable speed before they made contact with the planet. A formation Titan landing, like the MTT on steroids, would kick up a massive wave of sand, snow, dirt, or other debris, the repulsor lifts roaring to keep the craft stable. From here, the AT-ATs would deploy, the first 2 from the front bay dropping, followed by the second pair in the back. It's an interesting design choice for the Imps to go with a true dropship, with only its ablative armor to shield its descent rather than a more traditional lander, operating like a standard ship. But it does fit in perfectly with the shock and awe tactics preferred by Imperial AT-AT commanders, who we all know and love. In other cases, such as the Battle of Hoth, Imperial commanders chose to deploy their barges much further from the Rebel defenses, and chose to trek their AT-ATs overland to reach their targets, limiting their risk, and if they're honest, it was out of a respectful fear for the Rebel defenses, knowing not even the Emperor's great army was invincible. Titans were also used on aquatic worlds to deploy the AT-AT's water-based variant, the AT-AT Swimmer, with Titans landing directly on the ocean surface while disgorging the swimmers directly below into the sea. The fact that Incom produced this craft, along with its smaller cousin, the Theta-class AT-AT barge, may raise a few eyebrows given that they were responsible for the creation of the X-Wing. Remember, after the X-Wing designs made it out of Incom, the Empire nationalized the company and replaced many of its staff with loyalists to the regime. Sadly, Incom products became known for their mediocrity, nothing exceptional, just enough to perform to standard, while the Y85 may be the largest product to ever come from Incom's yards. The size I gave is based on the AT-ATs. There's no official number, but like I said, it must be about 75 meters long, 35 wide, and about 40 meters tall, making its footprint not much smaller than a full American football field, or more than 3 basketball courts in size, and equal to the height of about a 13-story building. With those dimensions, it's no surprise the Titan could only fit aboard dreadnought-sized Imperial warships, being much too large for Imperial Star Destroyer hangars. Only the most serious planetary engagements during the Imperial War would call for quads of AT-ATs, along with their Super Star Destroyer support, at which point a Rebel could only hope for a noble and quick death. An Executor-class Super Star Destroyer's complement of 30 AT-ATs could be deployed in one wave by just 8 of these barges. So that's it for the breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, the Imperial-class Star Destroyer was originally supposed to be able to carry 12 of these barges before author Curtis Saxton realized the ridiculous size implications of this, and the Theta-class was created to hold 1 to 2 AT-ATs aboard, while the Titans were relegated to use aboard Super-class ships. The method of deployment for AT-ATs on Hoth has gone back and forth between canon and legends, with the most recent canon information suggesting that Gazanti-class cruisers were used to deploy Blizzard Force, with older legends information suggesting the deployment of Titans. As cool as this actual dropship is, logistics-wise it would be simpler to just use Gazantis. But what do you guys think about this thing? Please comment down below, and if you hope to see something like this in some upcoming live action. Check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like them, but most important of all, remember, Incom was responsible for both the Rebel victory at Yavin and the Empire's strike back, that crushing defeat on Hoth, because the corporations are the only ones stronger than the Jedi and Sith, and the Force will be with you, always.